Chosen one, stop what you are doing right now. I need your full attention for what I am about to say, because there is a window that has been marked in the spiritual realm, and it opens in a matter of hours. Not days, not weeks, hours. And if you are hearing this message right now, on this day, at this exact moment, that is not coincidence. That is coordination at a level most people will never understand. 3 days have been set apart: June 20th, June 21st, and June 22nd. God did not randomly select these dates. He marked them. He circled them. He placed a seal over them before you were born, before your parents met, before your grandparents took their first breath on this earth. And the reason I am telling you this now is not to scare you. It is to wake you up, because something has been trying to put you to sleep right before the most important 72 hours of your entire year. Have you noticed it? The heaviness, the fog, the strange feeling that something is pulling you backward, even though you have been praying, even though you have been faithful, even though you have done everything you know how to do. That is not random. That is interference. And it has a schedule. It always arrives right before God is about to move. I need to be very direct with you. This is not a message you should listen to casually. This is not background noise for your commute. What I am about to walk you through over the next hour is a complete map of what God has assigned to these 3 days, what has been trying to block you from receiving it, and exactly how to position yourself so that nothing, absolutely nothing, slips through your fingers during this window. If something in your spirit just shifted, if you felt a chill, a tightness in your chest, a sudden alertness that was not there 30 seconds ago, type the words "marked by God" in the comments right now. Not later, right now. Because the fact that your body responded before your mind caught up is the first confirmation that this message was not suggested to you by an algorithm. It was delivered to you by assignment. Now, let me tell you what most people do not understand about divine timing. Most people think of God moving in seasons. They think in terms of months, years, general chapters of life. And that is true at one level. But there is a second level that almost no one talks about, and it is the level that determines whether you actually receive what God has been preparing or whether it passes through your hands like water through a cracked vessel. That second level is the window, not the season. The window. A season can last months. A window lasts days, sometimes hours. And the difference between someone who steps into their blessing and someone who wonders why it never arrived is almost never about worthiness. It is almost never about faith. It is about awareness. Were you aware that the window was open? Were you positioned? Were you alert? Or were you distracted, foggy, pulled sideways by something you could not even name? I have watched this pattern unfold hundreds of times, and it is always the same sequence. God prepares something extraordinary. He lines up the provision, the connection, the breakthrough, the healing. He sets the window, and then, like clockwork, right before the window opens, something moves against the person it was designed for. Not a dramatic attack, not something obvious, something subtle, a heaviness in the body, a fog in the mind, a sudden urge to withdraw, to isolate, to convince yourself that nothing is really happening, that you are just tired, that tomorrow will be better, that there is no rush. That subtlety is the design, because if the interference were obvious, you would fight it, you would pray against it, you would stand up and declare it broken. But when it feels like your own fatigue, your own doubt, your own reasonable assessment of the situation, you do not fight it, you agree with it. And agreement is the mechanism that causes the window to close while you are still standing in front of it. Let me name what has been happening to you this week, because if I do not name it, you will keep attributing it to the wrong source. You have been more tired than usual. Not the kind of tired that comes from physical labor, the kind of tired that comes from nowhere. You slept, but you woke up drained. You ate, but your body still felt heavy. You prayed, but the words felt like they were hitting the ceiling and falling back down. You tried to focus on something important, something that matters to your future, and within minutes your mind drifted to something meaningless. Now here is what you need to understand about June 20th, 21st, and 22nd. These 3 days are not ordinary days. They are what Scripture and ancient wisdom call a kairos window. Kairos is not the same as chronos. Chronos is clock time. It is the ticking of seconds, the turning of calendar pages, the slow accumulation of days that makes life feel long and repetitive. Kairos is God time. It is the moment when heaven punctures through the veil of Chronos and creates an opening that was not there yesterday and will not be there next week. We call this the Kairos rupture. The Kairos rupture is the moment when the ordinary timeline cracks open and something that has been held in reserve, something that has been prepared, completed, sealed, and waiting, is released into your physical reality, not gradually, not over the course of months, in a concentrated burst. 3 days, 72 hours. That is the size of the opening. And everything God has been arranging behind the scenes, the provision, the healing, the connection, the clarity, the breakthrough you have been praying about for months or even years, all of it is scheduled to move through this opening. But here is the part that most messages like this never say. The opening is not the hard part. God handled the opening. The hard part is the condition of the person standing in front of it. Because a kairos window does not force itself on you. It does not grab you by the shoulders and push you through. It opens and it waits. And if the person it was designed for is foggy, distracted, asleep, agreeing with the interference, operating on half their capacity, the window closes. Not because God withdrew it, because the receiver was not online. Think about that for a moment. The provision was prepared, the breakthrough was sealed, the healing was assigned, and the only variable, the only thing that determines whether you walk out of these 3 days transformed or walk out wondering what happened, is whether you are alert, clear, and positioned to receive what has already been given your name. That is not theology. That is the pattern. I have seen it happen to people who prayed for years and missed it because they were foggy on the day it arrived. I have seen it happen to people who were standing in the right place at the right time but could not recognize what was in front of them because their mind was running on a fraction of its capacity. And I have seen the opposite. People who were not more righteous, not more disciplined, not more spiritual, but who were clear, who were awake, who were running on everything God designed their mind to run on. And they walked through the window like it was a door that had been built specifically for their frame. You are listening to this right now for a reason, not because of chance, not because of a recommendation, because something in the spiritual realm arranged for this specific message to reach you before the window opens tomorrow. And the question is not whether God is going to move. He is going to move. The question is whether you are going to be awake enough, clear enough, positioned enough to catch what he is about to throw. If that question just landed somewhere deep in your chest, if you feel a stirring that is not anxiety but recognition, type the words, "I am awake," in the comments, because declaration is the first act of positioning. When you speak it, something shifts, not metaphorically, structurally. In the spiritual realm, your words carry frequency, and the frequency of declaration is the frequency that tells heaven you are ready. Let me take you deeper now, because understanding that a window is opening is only the first layer. The second layer, the one most people never hear about, is understanding what has been trying to stop you from being ready for it. I said earlier that interference arrives before every major window. That is true. But the form of the interference is not random. It is specific to the type of breakthrough that is coming. And the type of breakthrough that is assigned to these 3 days is one that requires a very particular kind of clarity. Not emotional clarity, not spiritual clarity in the way most people understand it. Neurological clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from a mind operating at its full designed capacity. Let me explain what I mean, because this is the part where most spiritual messages stop and most people remain stuck. You have been told that your struggle is spiritual, that if you pray harder, believe more, fast longer, meditate deeper, the fog will lift. And there is truth in that, at one level. Spiritual practice matters. Faith matters. Obedience matters. But there is a dimension that almost no spiritual teacher, no pastor, no guide has ever told you about. And it is this: your ability to receive what God sends is not purely a function of your spirit. It is also a function of your brain. Not your intelligence, not your education, not your IQ score. Your brain as a receiving instrument. The way your two hemispheres, left and right, communicate with each other. The degree to which they are synchronized, firing together, creating the state that neuroscience calls whole brain activation. When you were a child, this was your default state. Both hemispheres were alive, connected, synchronized. You could learn anything. You could feel everything. Your intuition was sharp. Your creativity was endless. Your connection to something greater than yourself was effortless. 98% of children operate at what researchers measure as creative genius level, not because children are smarter than adults, because their brains are whole. The two halves are talking to each other. The receiver is fully online. And then something happened. Not to you specifically, to almost everyone. Modern life, modern education, modern stress, modern information overload gradually eroded that synchronization. The two hemispheres began to disconnect, not dramatically, subtly, 1% at a time, year after year, until by adulthood, fewer than 1 in 1,000 people still maintain that childhood level of whole brain activation. This is not a theory. This is not a spiritual metaphor. This is the finding of Dr. Roger Sperry, who received the Nobel Prize in 1981 for his research on the split brain. He proved, in laboratory conditions, that the two hemispheres of the brain are designed to work together, and that when they do, the result is a level of cognitive, creative, and intuitive function that most adults have forgotten is even possible. And here is where this connects directly to what is happening to you right now, right before this 3-day window. The fog you have been feeling, it is not spiritual attack in the way you have been told. It is a symptom of a receiver operating below its designed capacity. The heaviness, not demonic oppression. A brain running on a fraction of what it was built to run on. The inability to focus, the drifting, the scrolling, the sense that you are moving through your days behind a veil of haze. That is not a character flaw. That is not a lack of faith. That is the neurological signature of hemisphere disconnection. You have been blaming yourself. You have been telling yourself you are lazy, you are undisciplined, you are not spiritual enough, you are not trying hard enough. And none of that is true. What is true is that the instrument God gave you to receive with, the instrument that determines how deeply and how clearly you can perceive what He is sending, has been operating at a fraction of its capacity. And no amount of prayer, no amount of fasting, no amount of belief will compensate for a receiver that is not fully switched on. That is not a comfortable thing to hear, I know that. But I would rather you hear it now, before the window opens, than have you stand in front of the most significant spiritual opening of your year with a receiver that can only pick up 30% of what is being transmitted. Think about it this way. Imagine someone hands you the most important letter of your life. It contains the instructions for everything you have been waiting for: the job, the healing, the relationship, the clarity about your calling, everything. But you are reading it through frosted glass. You can make out a few words, you get the general idea. But the specific details, the exact instructions, the precise timing, all of that is blurred. You walk away thinking you understood, but you missed 80% of what was written. And then you wonder why the breakthrough did not land the way you expected. Not because God is withholding, not because you are unworthy, because the receiver is foggy. And fog does not discriminate. It does not care how faithful you are. It does not care how long you have been praying. It blurs everything equally. The only way through it is not more effort, it is restoration. Restoring the instrument to its designed capacity. Restoring the synchronization between the two halves of your mind that was your birthright as a child and was gradually taken from you by a world that was never designed to protect it. Now, I want to take you into the first of several things God has assigned to these 3 days, because the window is not generic. It is not a blanket blessing that falls on everyone the same way. The Kairos rupture that begins on June 20th has a specific structure, and understanding that structure is what separates the person who walks through the window from the person who stands in front of it and does not realize it is open. The first day, June 20th, is the day of clearing. God has assigned the 20th as the day when everything that has been sitting on top of you, every weight that has been pressing down on your shoulders, every unresolved burden that you have been carrying because you did not know you were allowed to put it down, all of it is scheduled for removal, not gradual removal, sudden removal. The kind where you wake up and something that has been with you for so long you forgot it was not normal is simply gone. But clearing requires cooperation, not effort, cooperation. And cooperation requires awareness. You have to know what is being cleared in order to release it. You have to be awake enough to notice when the weight lifts so that you do not unconsciously reach back for it, because that is the pattern. God removes the burden. The person feels the lightness, and then, out of habit, out of familiarity, out of a nervous system that does not know how to function without the weight, they pick it back up. They re-engage the worry. They re-enter the old thought loop. They call the person they were finally free from. They rehearse the failure they were finally released from. That is not weakness. That is what happens when the mind is foggy. When the brain is running on partial capacity, it defaults to familiar patterns, even when those patterns are destructive. It does not have the clarity to choose differently. It does not have the processing power to recognize that the new state is better than the old one. It runs on autopilot, and autopilot always returns to what it knows, even if what it knows is suffering. The second day, June 21st, is the day of receiving. Once the clearing has happened, once the old weights have been lifted, there is an opening in your spirit that was not there before. And into that opening, God is going to pour. Not a trickle, a flood. Everything that has been held in reserve, everything that has been waiting for you to have enough capacity to hold it, is going to be released on the 21st. This is the day where the people who are clear, who are awake, who are running on full capacity, will experience something that others around them will not even register. It is not that God plays favorites. It is that receiving is a function of capacity. A cup that is full of old water cannot receive new water. A mind that is foggy cannot hold a clear revelation. A spirit that is weighed down by burdens that should have been released yesterday cannot stretch wide enough to contain what is being poured out today. The third day, June 22nd, is the day of declaration. This is the day when everything you received on the 21st is meant to be spoken, claimed, activated, not silently, not in the privacy of your thoughts, out loud. Because there is something about the human voice that bridges the spiritual and the physical. When you declare what God has deposited in you, you are not just speaking words, you are creating a frequency, and that frequency becomes a marker. It tells the spiritual realm that this person received it. This person is awake. This person is operating at full capacity, and now heaven can move to the next phase. If this structure resonates with something you have been sensing but could not name, if the 3-day framework just gave language to something that was already stirring inside you, type the words 3 days in the comments. Not because typing means anything magical, because declaration, even in written form, is the first act of cooperation with what God is doing. And cooperation is what keeps the window open. Now, before we go deeper, I need to address something that might be happening in your mind right now. Some of you, and I know exactly who you are because I have seen this pattern thousands of times, are sitting there thinking, this sounds incredible, but I have heard things like this before. I have been told about windows and seasons and divine timing, and I positioned myself. I prayed, I fasted, I believed, and nothing happened. The window came and went, and my life looked exactly the same afterward. If that is you, I want you to hear this carefully. You were not wrong. The window was real. Your faith was real. Your obedience was real. What was not real was the idea that faith alone was sufficient to receive at full capacity. Because here is the truth that nobody in your spiritual community ever told you. You showed up to the window with your spirit ready and your receiver offline. You had the faith of a giant and the neurological clarity of someone trying to read a map through a fogged windshield. That is not your fault. Nobody told you. Nobody connected the spiritual dimension of receiving with the neurological dimension of receiving. They told you to pray. They told you to believe. They told you to declare. And you did all of those things. But nobody told you that the instrument through which all of those things become effective, your brain, the physical organ that translates spiritual signal into conscious awareness, was running at a fraction of its designed capacity. You did not miss the window because you lacked faith. You missed it because you lacked the neurological clarity to perceive what was being offered. And that distinction, that one distinction, changes everything. Because if it was about faith, you would need to somehow manufacture more of it. But if it is about clarity, about the condition of the receiver, then there is a specific, measurable, addressable solution, and that solution exists. I am going to come back to that solution later in this message, but right now, I need you to hold this understanding because it is the foundation for everything else we are going to build together over the next hour. The window is real. Your assignment is real. The 3 days are marked, and the only variable, the only thing that determines whether this time is different from every other time, is not your faith. It is the clarity of your receiver. Hold that. We are about to go much deeper. Now I want to show you something about the specific nature of what has been blocking you, because it is not enough to know that interference exists. You need to understand its architecture. You need to see the blueprint of how it operates so that you can dismantle it consciously rather than fighting blindly against something you cannot see. There is a mechanism I call the threshold guardian. It is not a demon, it is not a person, it is a pattern, and it activates every single time you approach the edge of a significant spiritual transition. The threshold guardian does not attack when you are sitting still. It does not bother you when you are going through the motions of an ordinary week. It waits, it monitors, And the moment it detects that you are approaching something real, something that could actually change the trajectory of your life, it activates. And here is how it works. Pay close attention, because once you see this mechanism, you will never unsee it. The threshold guardian operates in 3 stages. Stage 1 is distraction. Not dramatic distraction, subtle distraction. A sudden urgency to handle something that has been sitting untouched for weeks. An argument that erupts out of nowhere with someone you love. A financial hiccup that demands immediate attention. A health scare that turns out to be nothing but consumes your emotional bandwidth for days. These events feel random. They feel like life. But their timing is surgical. They always arrive at the exact moment when your focus needs to be on what God is doing, not on putting out fires. Stage 2 is doubt. After the distraction has pulled your attention sideways, a voice begins to speak. And this voice does not sound like the enemy. It sounds like you. It sounds like your own rational mind making reasonable assessments. It says things like, maybe you are reading too much into this. Maybe this 3-day thing is just another message. Maybe nothing special is really happening. Maybe you should wait and see instead of getting your hopes up again. Do you hear how reasonable that sounds? That is the design. The threshold guardian does not speak in obviously evil tones. It speaks in the tone of caution, the tone of self-protection, the tone of someone who has been disappointed before and does not want to be disappointed again. And because it sounds like wisdom, you do not resist it. You agree with it. You pull back. You lower your expectations. You tell yourself you are being mature, being realistic, being smart. And all the while the window is open, God is pouring, and you are standing 3 feet away with your back turned because a voice that sounded like your own told you there was nothing to see. Stage 3 is exhaustion. If distraction does not work, if doubt does not work, the threshold guardian goes for the body. Sudden fatigue, heaviness in the limbs, a desire to sleep that is not earned by physical activity. Brain fog so thick you cannot hold a thought for more than 30 seconds. This is the stage most people mistake for a medical condition. They go to the doctor, they take supplements, they adjust their diet, and all of those things might help at the margins. But they do not address the root cause, which is that the fog is not coming from the body. It is coming from the gap between the 2 hemispheres of the brain that have been gradually disconnecting since childhood. The threshold guardian does not create the fog. It exploits it. I have seen this happen to some of the most faithful people I know. People who pray daily, people who fast regularly, people who have devoted their lives to spiritual growth. And still, when the window opens, they miss it. Not because they lacked devotion, because the threshold guardian found the neurological gap and exploited it at the worst possible moment. But here is what the threshold guardian does not want you to know. The gap is fixable. The disconnection between your 2 hemispheres is not permanent. It is not a sentence. It is a condition. And conditions can be changed, not through more effort, not through more willpower, through restoration of the instrument itself, through reactivating the synchronization that was your birthright, your default state, your God-given neurological design. And now, right before the most important 3-day window of your year, you are being asked to receive from God at a level that requires the full instrument, not the fractured version, not the foggy version, the full version. The version you had at 5 years old, when you could sense things adults around you could not, when you could feel shifts in the atmosphere before anyone told you what they meant, when you knew things without being taught them and trusted that knowing without questioning it. That version of you is not gone, it is dormant. And the difference between walking through this window transformed and walking through it unchanged is whether that dormancy ends before June 20th arrives. Now I want to take you into the second layer of what God has shown me about these 3 days, because the clearing, receiving, and declaring structure I shared with you is the macro framework. It is the large architecture. But inside that architecture, there are specific movements, specific moments, specific hinges that determine the depth of what you experience. And the next one is something that most people who hear messages about divine timing never learn about. I call it the arrival paradox. And it is one of the most misunderstood spiritual dynamics that exists. The arrival paradox is this: the closer you get to the thing God has prepared for you, the more resistance you encounter, not from the outside, from the inside, from your own mind, your own body, your own nervous system. The very systems that are supposed to carry you forward begin to pull you backward at the exact moment when forward movement matters most. And the reason is not what you think. It is not the enemy getting stronger. It is not spiritual warfare intensifying. It is your own internal architecture responding to the unfamiliar, because here is what nobody tells you about breakthrough. Breakthrough is not just spiritual, it is neurological. When you are about to step into something you have never experienced before, something beyond what your current patterns can process, your brain does not celebrate. Your brain panics. It reads the unfamiliar as danger. It reads the new as threat. And it activates every survival mechanism it has to pull you back into the familiar, even when the familiar is misery. This is not metaphor. This is documented neuroscience. The brain is wired for pattern recognition. It builds models of reality based on what it has experienced, and it fights, sometimes violently, to maintain those models even when they are outdated, inaccurate, and destructive. A person who has lived in struggle for 10 years has a brain that has been wired for struggle. Every neural pathway, every default response, every automatic thought loop has been shaped by the experience of difficulty. And when God opens a door to something different, something better, something that requires a completely new way of being, the brain does not see freedom, it sees a system failure. It sees the collapse of everything it knows how to navigate, and it pulls the emergency brake. That is the arrival paradox. The more real the breakthrough, the harder the internal resistance. The closer you get to the window, the stronger the pull backward. And the cruelest part is that the resistance feels like wisdom. It feels like caution. It feels like the mature part of you protecting you from disappointment. But it is not wisdom. It is a survival circuit that cannot tell the difference between a genuine threat and the unfamiliar shape of your own blessing. Let me show you how this plays out practically, because I know some of you have been living inside the arrival paradox for weeks without knowing what it was. You have been sensing that something big is coming. Something in your spirit has been restless, alert, expectant, and at the same time, something in your body has been heavy, resistant, pulling in the opposite direction. You feel it as a war between two parts of yourself. One part says move. The other part says wait. One part says this is real. The other part says you are fooling yourself. One part reaches for the door. The other part grabs your wrist and says not yet. That internal split is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something is right. It is the signature of proximity. The closer you get, the louder the resistance. And the fact that you are feeling it right now, in this week, in these days leading up to June 20th, is the clearest possible confirmation that what is on the other side of this window is significant enough for your own brain to mobilize against it. Now, here is the part that changes everything. The arrival paradox is not solvable by willpower. You cannot just push through it. You cannot just decide to be brave and force your way past the resistance. Because the resistance is not coming from your will. It is coming from your neurology. It is coming from pathways that were laid down years ago, patterns that fire automatically, responses that operate below the level of conscious choice. And willpower operates at the surface. It operates in the conscious mind. It cannot reach the circuits that are pulling you backward, because those circuits live deeper than willpower can go. This is why some of the most willful, most determined, most spiritually committed people you know are still stuck. They are not lacking effort. They are not lacking faith. They are fighting a surface battle against a deep structure problem. They are using a flashlight to fight something that lives underground. And every time they push forward with willpower, the deep circuits push back harder, and eventually willpower runs out. It always does. And when it does, the person collapses back into the old pattern, convinced that they failed, convinced that they are weak, convinced that the breakthrough was not meant for them. But they did not fail. Willpower failed. And willpower was never the right tool for this kind of problem. The right tool is something that operates at the same depth as the resistance, something that reaches the neurological layer, not just the spiritual layer. Something that addresses the gap between the two hemispheres that the threshold guardian exploits. The same gap that makes the arrival paradox so powerful. The same gap that turns proximity into paralysis. I am going to describe that tool in detail later. I want you to hold this for now, because what I need you to understand first is the landscape. I need you to see the full picture of what you are navigating before I show you the path through it. And the next piece of that picture is something I call the discernment collapse. The discernment collapse is what happens when hemisphere disconnection meets spiritual pressure. Here is what I mean. Your ability to discern, to tell the difference between God speaking and your own fear speaking, between genuine guidance and wishful thinking, between divine timing and impatience. That ability is not purely spiritual. It has a neurological component. And that component lives in the communication between your two hemispheres. The left hemisphere is logic, language, linear thinking. It processes information in sequence. It evaluates evidence. It makes rational judgments. The right hemisphere is intuition, pattern recognition, emotional intelligence, the capacity to sense what cannot be seen. It processes the invisible. It reads the room. It feels the shift before the shift has evidence. When these two hemispheres are synchronized, when the bridge between them is active and healthy, discernment is natural. You do not have to work at it. You feel the guidance, and your rational mind confirms it. You sense the timing, and your logical mind supports it. The two halves work together, and the result is clarity. Not just spiritual clarity, integrated clarity. The kind that moves you forward without second-guessing, without anxiety, without the paralysis of not knowing if you are hearing God or hearing yourself. But when the hemispheres are disconnected, when the bridge is weak or dormant, discernment collapses. The right hemisphere senses something, and the intuitive side responds by getting louder, by generating more feelings, more urgency, more signs and confirmations. And the logical side responds to that increased volume with increased skepticism. And now you have a war inside your own head. Two halves of the same brain arguing with each other because the bridge that is supposed to harmonize them is offline. Have you experienced this, or gut, but being unable to trust it because your mind keeps generating objections? The sense that God is speaking, but you cannot stop asking, is this really God, or am I just being desperate? The awareness that something important is happening, but the inability to act on it because every time you take a step, doubt pulls you back. That is not a lack of faith. That is a discernment collapse. That is what happens when the hemisphere bridge is down and the two systems that are designed to work together are working against each other instead. And I want you to understand something critical about this dynamic. The discernment collapse is not just uncomfortable, it is dangerous, specifically in the context of a Kairos window, because a Kairos window requires discernment to navigate. It is not a blank check. It is not a blanket blessing. It is a specific opening with specific contents, and the person who walks through it successfully is the person who can discern what is being offered, how to receive it, and what to do with it afterward. Remove discernment from the equation, and the window becomes a source of confusion rather than transformation. You walk through it unsure of what you received. You come out the other side unable to articulate what changed. And 6 months later, you look back and cannot tell the difference between that week and any other week. That is not because God did not move. It is because the collapse prevented you from perceiving the movement clearly enough to integrate it. The signal was transmitted. The receiver was too scrambled to decode it. I want you to sit with this for a moment before we go further, because what I have just described is the hidden architecture of every missed blessing in your life, every window that opened and closed, every prayer that was answered but somehow did not land, every breakthrough that came close but did not quite arrive. The threshold guardian exploited the gap. The arrival paradox intensified the resistance, and the discernment collapse prevented you from telling the difference between genuine guidance and fear-based withdrawal. 3 mechanisms working together, operating below the surface of your awareness. And none of them, not one, is a spiritual problem. They are neurological problems, wearing spiritual clothes. Now let me teach you something practical, because I do not believe in diagnosis without direction. If I show you the problem, I owe you the pathway. And the first pathway I want to give you is something you can use immediately, starting tonight, before June 20th arrives. I call it the Clarity Protocol, and it has 3 steps, not complicated steps, not steps that require special equipment or training, steps that engage the bridge between your hemispheres manually, temporarily, just enough to create windows of clarity within the larger fog. Think of it as a flashlight in a dark room. It does not turn on all the lights, but it shows you enough to take the next step without stumbling. Step 1 is bilateral engagement. This means doing something that forces both hemispheres to work together. The simplest version is this. Close your eyes. Place your left hand on your right shoulder and your right hand on your left shoulder. Now breathe, slowly, 5 breaths. What you are doing is creating a cross-lateral activation, the left hand communicating with the right hemisphere, the right hand communicating with the left hemisphere, both hemispheres receiving a signal at the same time. It is simple. It looks like nothing. But what it does at the neurological level is momentarily bridge the gap. It creates a temporary connection between the 2 halves, and in that connection, clarity appears. Step 2 is somatic grounding. After the bilateral engagement, keep your eyes closed and shift your attention to your body. Start at your feet. Feel them on the floor. Feel the weight. Feel the temperature. Move your attention up through your legs, your hips, your spine, your chest. Do not think about what you feel, just feel it. This step matters because when the hemispheres are disconnected, you live almost entirely in your head. Your thoughts loop, your worry cycles, your mind spins, but the body does not spin. The body is always in the present moment. And when you bring your attention into the body, you anchor yourself in the one place where the fog cannot follow. The fog lives in the mind, not in the body. Step 3 is the question. After you are grounded, after both hemispheres have been momentarily bridged, ask one question. Not a big question. Not what is my purpose, Not what does God want from me? Not will I ever be successful? One small specific question. Something like, what is the one thing I need to release before June 20th? Or, what is the one thing I need to be aware of when the window opens? Ask it once. Then, sit in silence for 60 seconds. Do not chase the answer. Let the answer come to you. The reason this works is because in the momentary clarity created by the bilateral engagement and the somatic grounding, the two hemispheres are speaking to each other. And when they speak to each other, discernment comes back online. Not permanently. Not in a way that lasts all day, but in a window. A small window of clarity within the larger fog. And in that window, the answer to your question will arrive not as a thought, not as a logical conclusion, but as a knowing. A settled, clear, unmistakable knowing that does not need to argue with doubt, because it comes from a place that doubt cannot reach. Practice this tonight. Practice it before you sleep. And practice it first thing when you wake up on June 20th. Because the clearing that God has assigned to the first day requires you to know what is being cleared. And the clarity protocol is the simplest way to access that knowing before the full restoration comes. Now, I want to address something directly, because some of you are listening to this and a specific type of resistance is forming. Not the threshold guardian, not the arrival paradox, something different. Something that sounds like this. You are thinking, I have heard about brain hemispheres before. I have heard about left brain and right brain, and it sounds like science mixed with spirituality, and I am not sure I trust it. If that is happening, I want you to know that I am not offended, and I am not dismissing you. That skepticism is actually one of the 4 types of resistance that shows up in messages like this, and it has a name. It is the resistance of the informed person, the person who has consumed enough spiritual content to recognize patterns and enough scientific content to question claims, and who sits at the intersection feeling like nothing quite fits. Here is what I want to offer you, not a rebuttal, an invitation. The research I am referencing is not fringe, it is not alternative. It won the Nobel Prize. Dr. Roger Sperry did not receive the Nobel Prize for something questionable. He received it for one of the most replicated and validated findings in the history of neuroscience. The split brain research has been the foundation of our understanding of hemisphere lateralization for over 4 decades. What I am doing is not mixing science and spirituality in a way that dilutes either one. I am pointing out that the physical instrument through which you receive spiritual information is subject to the same biological realities as every other organ in your body. Your eyes need light to see. Your ears need vibration to hear. Your brain needs hemisphere synchronization to perceive at full capacity. That is not mystical. That is anatomy. The question is not whether the science is real. It is. The question is what you do with it. And what I am suggesting is that restoring the instrument does not replace faith. It completes it. It gives your faith a clear channel to operate through instead of a foggy one. It does not make God move faster. It makes you capable of perceiving the movement that is already happening. If that distinction makes sense to you, if you can feel the difference between replacing faith and completing it, type the words faith and clarity in the comments, because that distinction is going to matter more and more as we go deeper into this message. Now, let me take you into the next layer. Because we have covered the macro structure of the 3 days, we have identified the threshold guardian, the arrival paradox, and the discernment collapse. We have given you the clarity protocol as an immediate tool. And now I want to show you something about the specific nature of what June 20th, 21st, and 22nd carry for you personally. Because until now, I have been speaking in general terms. I have been describing the architecture of the window, but the contents of the window are personal. They are specific to your assignment, your calling, your particular battlefield, and what I am about to share is not generic. It is the pattern I have observed in people who are in the exact season you are in right now. People who have been faithful for a long time without seeing the fruit of that faithfulness. People who have been carrying something heavy and did not know they were allowed to put it down. People who have been told by the world, by their circumstances, and sometimes by their own mind, that the best days are behind them. If that is you, I need you to lean in, because the next section of this message is going to address the deepest root of what has been blocking your reception. And it is something that most spiritual teachers never touch because it is uncomfortable. It requires honesty that most people are not willing to engage in, and it produces a kind of freedom that most people are not prepared for, because freedom is heavier than captivity when you have been carrying chains long enough to forget what your arms feel like without them. The root I am talking about is what I call the success terror. I did not say fear of failure. Everyone talks about fear of failure. Fear of failure is the surface. It is the cover story. It is what you tell your journal and your prayer group and your therapist. But underneath fear of failure, underneath the anxiety about things not working out, there is a deeper fear that almost nobody admits to. The fear that they might actually work out. The fear of success. The terror of actually receiving what you have been praying for. What happens when you succeed? What happens when the blessing arrives? What happens when the fog lifts and the provision comes and the relationship heals and the calling activates? Who do you become? And more frighteningly, who do you leave behind? This is not abstract. This is happening in your body right now. Some of you felt your stomach tighten when I named it. Some of you felt a heat in your face. Some of you felt tears prick the backs of your eyes. Because the success terror is not a concept. It is a lived experience. It is the reason you sabotage. It is the reason you procrastinate on the things that matter most. It is the reason you find yourself most distracted, most foggy, most exhausted right before the biggest opportunities of your life. You have been telling yourself that the fog is attack, and maybe part of it is, but part of it, a significant part, is your own nervous system pulling the emergency brake, because the destination terrifies it more than the journey. The destination means change, and change, at the neurological level, is indistinguishable from danger. Now here is where the success terror connects to the 3-day window. June 20th is the day of clearing. And one of the things that needs to be cleared, one of the most important things, is the unconscious agreement you have made with your own smallness. The agreement that says it is safer to be stuck than to be free. Safer to be foggy than to be clear. Safer to miss the window than to walk through it and discover that the other side requires you to be someone you have never been. That agreement was not made consciously. You did not sit down one day and decide to stay small. It was made by a nervous system that was trying to protect you. It was made by a brain that read expansion as threat because expansion was unfamiliar. It was made by the same hemisphere disconnection that has been reducing your capacity for years. Because when the brain is whole, when both hemispheres are synchronized, the unfamiliar does not register as threat. It registers as opportunity. The whole brain has the processing power to evaluate new situations accurately. But the fragmented brain, the brain running on partial capacity, does not have that processing power, so it defaults to the simplest possible response: danger, retreat, stay. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine waking up on June 20th and feeling, for the first time in years, that the thing you have been praying for does not scare you. Now there is a second mechanism I need to name. It operates alongside the success terror but comes from a different source entirely. I call it the generational echo. And it is the pattern you inherited without anyone ever telling you they passed it down. Think about your mother. Think about your father. Think about the adults who shaped your earliest understanding of how the world works. What happened to them when good things arrived? Did they receive freely? Did they celebrate without anxiety? Did they trust that the blessing would last? Or did they brace? Did they say things like, "Do not get too excited"? Did they follow every good season with a warning that bad times were right around the corner? Did they receive with one hand and hold on to worry with the other? If you grew up watching the adults around you respond to blessings with fear, your nervous system recorded that pattern as the correct response. Not consciously, not as a belief you can argue with, as a neurological template. Blessing arrives, fear activates, retreat follows. That template is running in your body right now, and it has been running for so long that you do not even recognize it as inherited. You think it is just who you are. You think you are naturally cautious, naturally anxious about good things, naturally suspicious of seasons that feel too good to be true. But that is not who you are. That is who they were. And their pattern became your pattern because the brain of a child absorbs the responses of the adults around it like a sponge absorbs water, without filter, without evaluation, without the capacity to say, "That is their fear, not mine." The generational echo is one of the most powerful blockers I have ever encountered because it hides inside your personality. It masquerades as wisdom. It tells you that being cautious about blessings is mature, is realistic, is the responsible way to live. But it is not wisdom. It is a pattern that was born from the pain of someone else, the disappointment of someone else, the experience of someone else, of having good things taken away. And it is living in your body as if it were your own. Now here is the connection to these 3 days that I need you to hear. June 20th, the day of clearing, is not just about clearing your burdens. It is about clearing their burdens. The ones you have been carrying without knowing they were not yours. The generational weight that makes you brace every time God moves. The echo that whispers, "Do not trust this," every time the window opens. And the clearing of generational patterns requires more than prayer. I want to be very honest about that. Prayer addresses the spiritual dimension, but the echo lives in the neurological dimension. It is stored in the neural pathways that were laid down in childhood. And changing neural pathways requires something that reaches the physical brain, not just the spirit. Something that restores the hemisphere synchronization that gives you the capacity to differentiate between your authentic response and the inherited one. Because that differentiation is the very definition of discernment. And discernment, as we discussed, lives in the bridge between the two hemispheres. When the bridge is active, you can feel the difference between your fear and their fear. You can sense which burdens are yours to carry and which were placed on your shoulders by patterns that predated your birth. You can sort the authentic from the inherited. And once you can sort, you can release. But when the bridge is down, everything feels the same. Your fear, their fear. Your doubt, their doubt. Your response, their response. It all blurs together into one undifferentiated mass of heaviness that you carry everywhere you go, believing it is all yours, believing it is all earned, believing it is all permanent. It is not permanent. It is not all yours. And the 3-day window that begins tomorrow is the appointed time for the sorting to begin. If what I just described touched something deep, something you did not even know was there until I named it, type the words, "The echo ends with me" in the comments, because that declaration is not just words. It is a severing. It is the moment you choose to stop carrying what was never yours to carry. And when God sees that choice, made with clarity, made with awareness, made with both hemispheres engaged, He honors it in ways that generational patterns cannot survive. Now I want to shift into something different, because we have been in the deep waters of mechanism and pattern for a while, and I want to bring you to the surface for a moment, not because the depth does not matter, but because there is a kind of rest that the spirit needs between revelations, a moment to breathe, a moment to let what has been said settle before we pour more in. So let me tell you what I have seen happen in the lives of people who enter a Kairos window prepared, not in theory. In practice, I have watched people who were stuck for years suddenly move, not gradually. Suddenly, I have watched career doors that were bolted shut swing open in a single conversation. I have watched marriages that had deteriorated to the point of cohabitation rather than partnership suddenly find their way back to warmth, to laughter, to the thing they had both given up on. I have watched health conditions that doctors could not explain begin to shift within days of the person entering the window with clarity. I am not promising you those specific outcomes. I do not know what God has assigned to your window, but I am telling you the pattern. When the receiver comes fully online, when the fog lifts, when both hemispheres are synchronized and the person approaches the window awake and clear and positioned, what flows through is always, without exception, more than what was expected. Not because God increases the portion, because the person can finally receive the full portion that was there all along. Now I want to shift into something that has been sitting beneath this entire message, like a river running underground. And it is this: the obstacles you are facing right now, the heaviness, the fog, the resistance, are not random. They are not even entirely personal. They are archetypal. They follow a pattern that has been documented in sacred texts, in wisdom literature, in the stories of every figure who ever stood at the threshold of a divine assignment and almost did not walk through. I want to tell you about a man named Joseph, not the Joseph most people think of first. The Joseph who was sold by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, carried to a foreign land, falsely accused, imprisoned, forgotten. If you know the story, you know it as a story of suffering and eventual triumph. But there is a detail in that story that most people skip over, and it is the detail that matters most for what you are navigating right now. Joseph did not just endure suffering. Joseph endured proximity. He was close to his breakthrough multiple times before it actually arrived. He interpreted the dream of the cupbearer in prison and asked the cupbearer to remember him when he was restored to his position. The cupbearer was restored, and he forgot Joseph. For 2 years, 2 full years of sitting in the same prison, carrying the same assignment, knowing he had the gift, knowing he had the calling, knowing he had done everything right, and watching the door that should have opened remain shut. That is the cruelest form of waiting, not the waiting of someone who does not know if the promise is real. The waiting of someone who has already seen confirmation, who has already demonstrated the gift, who has already done the work, and who still has to sit in the gap between confirmation and manifestation. That gap is where you are right now. You have already received confirmation. You already know the calling is real. You have already seen glimpses, moments, flashes of what God is building. And you are sitting in the prison of proximity, watching the door that should have opened, wondering if the cupbearer forgot. He did not forget. The timing was not ready. And the reason the timing was not ready has nothing to do with God testing you. It has to do with the condition of the receiver at the moment of delivery. Joseph, at 28, was not the same Joseph who would eventually stand before Pharaoh at 30. The gift was the same. The calling was the same, but the capacity to hold what was coming had not yet been developed. And the 2 years in prison were not punishment. They were calibration. They were the period during which the instrument was being tuned to match the frequency of what was about to be poured through it. You are in your calibration period right now. The 3-day window that opens tomorrow is not the beginning of your story. It is the culmination of a calibration period that has been running for months, possibly years. Everything you have been through, every disappointment, every delay, every almost but not quite, was not wasted. It was preparation, and the preparation is nearly complete. The question is whether the final adjustment, the one that happens between now and June 22nd, happens with you aware and participating, or whether it happens to you while you sit in the fog and wonder why nothing is moving. Now, I want to pause and hold something in front of you before we continue. Over the past few years, something has been discovered in research laboratories that most people who care about the things we have been discussing have never been told about. Not because it contradicts what is sacred, because it came from a direction most of us are not watching. A small group of neuroscientists, led by a doctor in New York who has spent 20 years studying the human brain, found something about the way the mind is designed that explains something most spiritually sensitive people have felt but have never been able to name. Something so fundamental it traces back to a Nobel Prize, yet so simple in its application that it sounds almost suspicious at first. I am going to tell you what they found later in this message, but right now, hold this question. What if the reason your mind feels foggy is not age, not lack of discipline, not spiritual failure? What if something was taken from you at the neural level, something that was your birthright, something that determines how clearly you can receive what God sends? And what if there is a way to get it back? Hold that. We will return to it. Because right now, I need to take you into the specific obstacles that are standing between you and full reception during this 3-day window. And these are not the general obstacles you have heard about in other messages. These are the hidden ones, the ones that operate so deep inside your psychology that you mistake them for your personality. The first hidden obstacle is what I call the unworthiness loop. It works like this. God presents an opportunity. You see it, you recognize it, your spirit leaps toward it. And then, somewhere between the recognition and the action, a voice speaks. Not a loud voice, a quiet one. And it says, "This is for someone better than you, someone more disciplined, someone more spiritual, someone who did not mess up the way you did, someone who deserves this." And before you can argue with it, the voice has already done its work. Your hand was reaching for the door, and now it is at your side. Your feet were moving forward, and now they are planted. Not because you decided to stop, because the unworthiness loop decided for you. And here is the mechanism that makes it so devastating. The unworthiness loop does not just make you feel unworthy. It makes you feel that feeling unworthy is appropriate. It convinces you that the reluctance to receive is actually humility, that stepping back is actually reverence, that saying "I am not ready" is actually wisdom. And so, you do not fight it, you embrace it, you call it spiritual maturity. And you walk away from the door that God opened specifically for you, telling yourself that you did the right thing, while the window closes behind you and the provision that had your name on it goes unclaimed. This is not humility. Humility is being honest about who you are. Unworthiness is being wrong about who God says you are. And the difference between the two is the difference between walking through the window and walking past it. God did not mark these 3 days for the people who earned it. He marked them for the people he chose. And choosing is the prerogative of God, not yours. You do not get to decide you are not worthy of what God has already assigned to you. That is not your decision to make. The second hidden obstacle is what I call the exhaustion mask. It is related to what I described earlier about the threshold guardian using exhaustion as a weapon. but it goes deeper. The exhaustion mask is when genuine spiritual exhaustion, the kind that comes from years of fighting, believing, and enduring without visible results, covers your eyes so completely that you cannot tell the difference between rest and resignation. Rest says, I am pausing to restore my strength. I am stepping back to prepare for what is coming. Rest is temporary and purposeful. Resignation says, I am done. I am tired of hoping. I am tired of being disappointed. I do not have the energy for another window, another season, another promise that might not land. Resignation is permanent and purposeless. The exhaustion mask makes resignation look like rest. It makes giving up feel like being at peace. It makes walking away from the door feel like releasing your expectations to God. And the reason it is so effective is that you are genuinely tired. You are not faking it. The exhaustion is real. Years of carrying, years of waiting, years of watching doors close. Those take a toll. And when you are that tired, the difference between rest and resignation is razor thin. You need the full processing power of an integrated mind to tell them apart. And when the mind is running on partial capacity, when the hemispheres are disconnected, when the fog is thick, you cannot make that distinction. So you default to the one that requires less energy. Resignation always requires less energy than rest, because rest implies you are going to get back up. Resignation means you can finally lie down. I know some of you are in that place right now. I know because I can feel the texture of it in the very fact that you are still listening. You are here. You are listening. But part of you has already given up. Part of you is here out of habit, not hope. Part of you is listening because what if, while another part has already written this off as one more message that sounds beautiful but changes nothing. And I am not going to argue with that part of you. I am not going to try to convince you that this time is different. What I am going to do is name it, because naming it is the first step in breaking its power. And then I am going to show you something that no amount of hope or positive thinking can replicate. Something physical, something measurable. Something that operates at the level of your neurology, not just your spirituality. But first, let me take you into the third hidden obstacle, because this one is the most subtle and potentially the most dangerous, especially in the context of a specific window with specific dates. I call it the delay identity. The delay identity is what happens when you have been waiting so long that waiting becomes who you are. Not what you are doing, who you are. You have internalized the delay. You have built your entire self-concept around the idea that you are the one who waits, the one who believes but does not receive, the one who prays but does not see, the one who is always on the verge but never quite there. And here is the terrifying thing about the delay identity. It does not want the delay to end, because if the delay ends, the identity collapses. If you actually receive what you have been waiting for, you have to become someone new. And becoming someone new, as we discussed with the success terror, is something the fragmented brain reads as a threat. The delay identity is the success terror wearing a more sophisticated disguise. It does not say, I am afraid of success. It says, I am at peace with the process. It does not say, I am terrified of change. It says, I trust the timing of God. And both of those statements can be true. Trusting the timing of God is real. Being at peace with the process is real. But when those statements are being used to justify staying in a holding pattern that God has already told you to leave, they stop being faith. They become the most spiritually decorated form of resistance there is. How do you tell the difference? How do you know if your patience is genuine faith or if it is the delay identity keeping you comfortable in the waiting room after your name has already been called? discernment. And discernment, as we covered, requires the bridge between both hemispheres to be active. The left hemisphere evaluates the evidence. The right hemisphere senses the season. Together, they tell you whether it is time to wait or time to move. Apart, you are guessing. And in the context of a 3-day Kairos window, guessing is not good enough. I have seen people sit in the delay identity while God was pouring. I have seen people watch the provision flow past them, watch the door stand open, watch the window fill with light, and say, "Not yet. I trust the timing." And the window closed, and they went back to their prayer closet, and they prayed for the thing that had already come and gone. And they will tell you, with total sincerity, that they are waiting on God, when the truth is that God was waiting on them, and they were not awake enough to notice. That is not going to be you, not this time, not during this window, because you are hearing this message before the window opens. You are receiving the diagnosis before the symptom becomes critical. You are being given the map before you enter the territory. And that is not accident. That is God being extraordinarily specific about making sure you do not miss what He has marked for you. Now I want to talk about the identity archetypes that God has been developing in you during this season. Because the 3-day window is not just about receiving provision, it is about receiving identity. The fullness of who you are meant to be, not the reduced version, not the foggy version, not the version that has been operating at 30% capacity and calling it normal. The full version. There are specific identity patterns that emerge in people who are approaching a Kairos rupture, and I want to name the ones I see most clearly in the people listening to this message. The first is the seer. The seer is the person who has always known things before they happened. You knew the job was not right for you within the first week, and it took 2 years for the evidence to catch up with what you already knew. The seer does not receive information through logic. The seer receives through the right hemisphere, through the intuitive channel that connects directly to the part of reality that logic cannot access. But here is the problem. The seer whose hemispheres are disconnected does not trust what they see. They see it, they feel it, they know it, and then they second-guess it. They overanalyze it. They run it through the left hemisphere looking for confirmation that the left hemisphere cannot provide, because the left hemisphere was not designed to confirm intuitive knowledge. It was designed to complement it, to work alongside it. And when the bridge is down, complementing becomes competing, and the seer stops seeing. The second is the cycle breaker. This is the person who was born into a pattern that has repeated for generations, poverty that passes from parent to child, relationship patterns that loop through every branch of the family tree, health crises that appear at the same age, in the same way, generation after generation. The cycle breaker is the one who feels, deep in their spirit, that the pattern ends with them, not because they are special, because they are positioned. They are the generation that stands at the intersection of awareness and action. They can see the pattern, they can name it, and they have the fire to break it. The third is the wounded healer. This is the person whose deepest gift grew directly out of their deepest pain. The person who understands suffering not from a textbook, but from a lived scar. The person who can sit with someone in the darkest night of their soul because they have been in that same darkness and found their way out. The wounded healer carries an authority that cannot be taught and cannot be faked. It comes from survival. It comes from transformation. And it comes with a specific vulnerability, the tendency to keep returning to the wound. The wounded healer who has not fully healed does not stop being a healer. They just become an exhausted one. They give from a place of depletion. They pour from an empty cup. They help others find the light while sitting in their own shadow, because they never quite made it all the way through their own healing journey. They got far enough to help, not far enough to rest. And that distance, that gap between far enough to help and far enough to rest, is the hemisphere gap. It is the difference between a mind that can process its own trauma fully and a mind that processes it partially, leaving residue, leaving echoes, leaving the wound technically closed, but still tender to the touch. Whether you are the seer, the cycle breaker, the wounded healer, or something else entirely, the 3-day window carries the same promise. Full activation, not partial, not incremental, full. The version of you that you have been catching glimpses of in your most clear-headed moments, your most connected prayers, your most lucid dreams. That version is not a fantasy, it is a blueprint. It is the original design. And the Kairos rupture is the moment when the blueprint stops being a drawing on a wall and starts being the house you live in. Now here is a question I want you to hold as we move into the next section. The question is this: if you have been operating at reduced capacity for years, possibly decades, and you have still managed to survive, to keep your family together, to maintain your faith, to show up day after day in a world that gives you very little credit for the weight you carry, what happens when the full capacity comes back online? What happens when the 30% becomes 100? What happens when the fog lifts and the receiver is restored, and every prayer you have been praying through a frosted window is suddenly prayed through crystal clear glass? I will tell you what happens. Everything accelerates, not because God speeds up, because you catch up. The provision that has been sitting in your spiritual account, unclaimed, because you could not see it clearly enough to recognize it, suddenly becomes visible. The connections that have been circling your life, waiting for you to be alert enough to notice them, suddenly announce themselves. The ideas that have been trying to land in your consciousness, blocked by the fog, suddenly break through like sunlight through a clearing sky. That is what these 3 days carry, not a new blessing, the full reception of blessings that have already been assigned, already been sealed, already been placed within reach. The only thing that has been missing is the clarity to see them and the capacity to hold them, and that is about to change. Let me go deeper now into something that connects the identity archetypes to the specific mechanics of these 3 days. Because identity is not just a label. I want to introduce you to a concept that comes from the Hebrew language. The word is tselem. It appears in the book of Genesis, in the verse that says, humanity was created in the tselem of God. Most translations render this as image. You were made in the image of God. And most people hear that and think of it as a metaphor, a poetic way of saying you are special. But tselem is not metaphor. Tselem is engineering. The root of tselem carries the meaning of a shadow cast by a real object. Not a copy, not an imitation, a projection. The way a 3-dimensional object casts a 2-dimensional shadow on a wall. The shadow is not separate from the object. It is caused by the object. It moves when the object moves. It changes shape when the object shifts. But it exists in a reduced dimension. It cannot do everything the object can do. It is limited by the surface it is projected onto. You are the tselem of God. You are the projection of divine intelligence, divine creativity, divine authority, cast into a human body, onto a human brain, in a 3-dimensional world. And the limitations you experience, the fog, the disconnection, the reduced capacity, are not evidence that you are less. They are evidence that the surface you are projected onto, your neurology, your hemisphere synchronization, your whole brain activation, is not fully receiving the signal that is being projected through it. The signal is constant. God, does not stop projecting. The creativity, the insight, the wisdom, the power, all of it is streaming through you right now, in this second, as you listen to these words. But the surface, the brain, the receiver, is foggy, cracked, running at partial resolution. And so the shadow you cast in the world, the version of you that shows up in your relationships, your finances, your health, your calling, is a reduced version, a dimmer version, a blurrier version. Not because the source is dim, because the surface is compromised. Restore the surface and the shadow sharpens. Restore the receiver and the projection comes into focus. Restore the whole brain activation and the Selim of God that you were designed to be stops being a faded, grainy version and becomes high definition. Crisp, clear, unmistakable. The kind of presence that walks into a room and shifts the atmosphere without saying a word. The kind of clarity that sees opportunity where others see confusion. The kind of authority that does not need to be announced because it radiates from a mind that is whole. That is your birthright. That is what was active in you as a child. That is what 98% of children carry before the world gradually erodes it. And that is what these 3 days are designed to restore, not partially, not incrementally, fully. Moses at the burning bush. This is a man who has been in exile for 40 years. 40 years of tending sheep in the wilderness after being raised as royalty. 40 years of watching his potential gather dust. 40 years of wondering if the fire he once felt was just the arrogance of youth. And then, at 80 years old, long past the point where most people have given up, he turns aside to look at a bush that is burning but not consumed. And the text says that when God saw that he turned aside to look, only then did God speak, not before. Only when Moses demonstrated the awareness, the alertness, the willingness to notice something that most people would have walked past, did the voice come. The voice was no T, waiting for Moses to be more righteous. It was waiting for Moses to be more awake. That is the dynamic of a Kairos window. God does not speak into fog. God speaks into clarity. God does not pour into a vessel that is asleep. God pours into a vessel that has turned aside, that has noticed. That is alert enough to see the burning bush and curious enough to approach it instead of explaining it away. You are approaching your burning bush right now. These 3 days, June 20th, 21st, and 22nd, are the bush. And the question is not whether the bush is burning. It is burning. The question is whether you will turn aside, whether you will pay attention, whether you will approach with both hemispheres engaged, with full clarity, with the receiver online, or whether the fog will convince you that there is nothing unusual about these days, that they are just Saturday, Sunday, Monday, that the fire you see is just heat shimmer, that the stirring in your spirit is just emotion. The most powerful prophet of his generation, the man who just witnessed one of the greatest demonstrations of divine power in recorded history, was exhausted to the point of despair. And the response of God was not a rebuke. The response of God was rest. An angel brought bread and water. Elijah ate, slept, ate again, slept again. And only after the physical instrument was restored did God speak the next instruction. That pattern is critical. God did not give Elijah the next assignment while Elijah was depleted. God restored the instrument first, the body, the mind, the neurological capacity to hear clearly. And then, and only then, came the still small voice. Not the fire, not the earthquake, not the wind. The still small voice that can only be heard by a mind that is whole, a brain that is quiet, a nervous system that is no longer in survival mode. Your June 20th is the bread and water. Your June 21st is the hearing. Your June 22nd is the movement, but the bread must come before the voice. And the bread, in your case, is the restoration of the receiver, the clearing of the fog, the reactivation of the hemisphere, synchronization that makes it possible for you to hear the still, small voice instead of just the noise. Deborah is the archetype of the seer operating at full capacity, both hemispheres online, logic and intuition in harmony. She does not just feel what God is doing, she articulates it. She does not just sense the timing, she commands the army. She does not just receive the revelation, she implements it with precision. And the result is not just personal breakthrough, it is national liberation. An entire generation is set free because one person was operating at full clarity. That is the weight of what these 3 days carry. Not just for you, for everyone connected to you, for your children, for your community, for the people whose liberation is tied to your clarity. Because a clear mind does not just bless the person who carries it. It creates a ripple, it creates an atmosphere, it creates the conditions for everyone within your radius to begin waking up to their own assignment. Chosen one, you are not just receiving for yourself this weekend, you are receiving for a generation, and the generation cannot receive what you are not clear enough to carry. The provision flows through you first. The clarity lands in you first. The breakthrough breaks through you first, and then it flows outward, downward, into the lives of everyone who was waiting for someone in their line to finally wake up. That is why the fog attacked early. That is why the threshold guardian activated. That is why the arrival paradox intensified. Because the breakthrough assigned to this window is not just personal, it is generational. It is corporate. It is the kind of breakthrough that changes family trees and alters destinies and rewrites the story for people who do not even know your name yet. And the only question is whether the instrument will be online when the window opens. We are about to go much deeper. What comes next is the most important section of this entire message. It is the section where everything I have been building, every mechanism I have named, every pattern I have described, converges on a single point. And that point is the specific, measurable, addressable solution that transforms everything we have discussed from diagnosis into direction. Stay with me. You have come this far for a reason, and the reason is about to become very clear. Now I want to close the loop that has been open since the earlier part of this message, because I told you there was something discovered in research laboratories that I was going to come back to. And I want to tell you now why I waited until this moment to bring it forward. And now you are ready for the answer. Not a general answer, the specific answer. The one that addresses the root, not the symptom. The one that operates at the same depth as the problem it solves. But before I take you there, I need to do something important. I need to give you the frame that makes what follows land correctly. Because without this frame, what I am about to describe will sound like a product. And it is not a product in the way your mind understands that word. It is a restoration tool. It is a mechanism for returning the brain to the state it was designed to operate in. And the distinction between a product and a restoration tool is the distinction between buying something new and reclaiming something that was always yours. Here is why that distinction matters. When you buy a product, you are adding something from outside yourself. When you restore an instrument, you are removing the barrier between the instrument and its original design. You are not adding capacity. You are unblocking capacity that already exists. You are not installing new software. You are removing the fog from the screen so you can see the software that has been running underneath all along. The chosen one does not need more. The chosen one needs clear. And clear is not a spiritual state you achieve through effort. Clear is a neurological state you restore through the resynchronization of the two hemispheres that God designed to work together from the moment you were conceived. Now, let me tell you what the research found. A woman from California, a nurse from San Diego, described what her life felt like before she encountered what I am about to describe. She had tried everything: prayer, journaling, meditation, every practice her community offered. She was sincere, she was faithful, she was consistent, and she kept arriving at the same experience. She believed the words, she understood the concepts, but she could not feel the reality behind them, not in her body, not in the lived texture of her days. It was as if there was a glass wall between her and the life she was praying for. She could see it, she could describe it, she could not touch it. After 10 days, she said something cleared. Something she had not even known was blocked, opened, like a channel that had been dammed, not because she tried harder, not because she discovered a new prayer technique, because the receiver had been repaired. A man from Texas described something similar, but from a different angle. Someone who had spent years holding things together for everyone around him, while his own interior life became thin and distant. He described prayer as talking into a wall, not because he doubted God, because the signal was going out but nothing was coming back. The frequency was right, but the receiver was off. He said his brain felt like it was running on 2 cylinders when it was designed for 12. 2 weeks later, he woke up and described his mind as running on all of what it was supposed to run on. The fog that had been so consistent he stopped registering it as fog was simply gone, not gradually fading, gone, like someone had wiped a window clean that he had been looking through for years without realizing it was dirty. That is because of what the team I am about to describe spent years building. In 1981, Dr. Roger Sperry received the Nobel Prize for his research on the split brain. He proved in laboratory conditions what spiritual traditions had intuited for centuries: that the human brain is designed as a unified system. 2 hemispheres, left and right, meant to operate in constant, synchronized communication. When they do, the result is what researchers call whole brain activation, a state of cognitive, creative, intuitive, and spiritual function that most adults have lost access to without ever knowing it was taken. His research showed that can operate at what is measured as creative genius level, not because children are inherently smarter, because their brains are whole. Both hemispheres are synchronized. The bridge between them is active, healthy, transmitting at full bandwidth. And then, gradually, through the accumulation of modern stress, information overload, educational systems that favor one hemisphere over the other, and the general erosion of neurological conditions that support synchronization, the bridge weakens. The hemispheres begin to operate in isolation, and by adulthood, fewer than 1 in 1,000 people maintain the level of whole brain activation they had as children. A team of neuroscientists led by Dr. Daniel Barone in New York spent years doing the following. They took over an hour of clinical neural sync technology, the kind of whole brain activation protocol used in specialized medical settings that costs $300 per session in person and $7,000 for a home unit, and through an intensive compression and refinement process, they turned it into an 8-minute targeted auditory sequence. 8 minutes a day. Headphones, eyes closed. That is the entirety of the physical requirement. They call it the genius switch. It is not a brainwave product, not a meditation app, not a sound frequency designed to put you in a particular mood. It is a targeted auditory sequence, specifically engineered based on the Nobel Prize research of Dr. Roger Sperry to reconnect the two hemispheres and restore the whole brain activation that was the default state in childhood. It does not add anything to your brain that was not already there. It reactivates what was suppressed. It rebridges what was disconnected. It restores the receiver to the condition it was in before the modern world, gradually, silently, relentlessly turned it down. If you have used binaural beats or sound frequency products before and found them underwhelming, Dr. Barone addresses this directly. Those products target only a fraction of the picture. Sound waves alone are incomplete. What he and his team built targets hemisphere synchronization at the whole brain level using a multi-layer protocol developed from years of clinical refinement. That is a different mechanism, and it produces a different category of result. The genius switch is not for everyone. It is for the chosen one who understands that God prepared not only the promise, but the mind that must walk into it. The person who has been sincere for years, who has done the work, who has felt the call clearly and kept returning to it even when the evidence was not cooperating, and who is willing to stop treating the fog as a character flaw and start treating it as something that has a specific neurological address. Most people who hear about this will scroll past. They have accepted the reduced version of their mind as permanent. You are still here. That is not coincidence. That is the specific kind of persistence that belongs to the person this was built for. Now let me walk you through the specifics of what it contains and what it costs, because transparency matters. And I would rather give you every detail and let your spirit decide than hide behind vague language and hope you trust blindly. Dr. Barone and his colleagues originally discussed making this available at $500, and at that price, it would have been extraordinary value compared to the alternatives. In-person neurofeedback sessions run $300 per hour. Home neurofeedback units cost $7,000. Left nostril breathing, a technique that can partially activate hemisphere synchronization, requires 20 minutes per day of focused effort and takes months to produce measurable results. The genius switch is not $500. It is not $200. It is not $100. It was released at $49. And today, on the page where I am directing you, there is an additional $10 reduction, $39, for a tool that targets the same neurological mechanism that costs $300 per session in a clinical setting. That is not a discount. That is a decision by a team of scientists who understood that the people who need this most are not the people who can afford $7,000 for a home unit. They are the people who have been carrying the weight of hemisphere disconnection without ever knowing what it was or that a solution existed. At $39, you receive the 8-minute targeted auditory sequence plus 4 bonuses that were included to support the full restoration process. A guided visualization created by one of the top-rated creators on the Calm app, designed to help you see your life unfolding in 4 areas: money, love, health, and happiness. A smart grocery shopping guide that identifies 10 common foods that contribute to brain fog and provides alternatives that save over $100 per month at stores like Walmart, Target, and Costco. A classic manifestation text that is over 100 years old, the root of every modern manifestation technique, currently selling for $20 on Amazon, included free. And a printable 5 Habits infographic, designed for daily visual reinforcement. Everything is backed by a 100% unconditional money-back guarantee. Listen once, listen 80 times. If it does not do what it has done for over 18,000 people, every dollar is returned. No conditions, no questions, no expiration. The guarantee is not a marketing tactic. It is the confidence of a team that spent years refining the mechanism and knows what it does. The $39 price is not guaranteed beyond this page. Dr. Barone and his team have communicated that the price will increase. That is not pressure. That is the reality of what limited-run access to clinical-grade neurological restoration looks like. The development costs are real. The compression process alone took years. And the decision to release it at this price was made with the understanding that it would not stay at this price indefinitely. If your spirit resonates with what has been described, if something in you has been confirming every word since the moment I began explaining the hemisphere connection, the link is in the description below and in the pinned comment, not anywhere else. You can read everything on their page before making any decision. Every detail is laid out clearly. Nothing is hidden. Nothing requires you to commit before you understand. One thing worth naming directly. If you search the internet for anything that sounds similar, you will find tracks and products that carry similar sounding names. Dr. Barone and his team studied them. Most had no neural sync technology embedded at all. They carried the name because the barrier to labeling something that way is essentially zero. The mechanism is what makes the difference, and the mechanism only exists in what his team built. The direct page is the only verified source. That is where the link below points. For those whose spirit has already confirmed, if you feel that quiet yes in your chest, the one that does not need evidence because it is evidence, go there now. Go before the window opens tomorrow. Because the 8-minute sequence used tonight and again tomorrow morning before the Kairos rupture begins is the difference between approaching the 3-day window with a foggy receiver and approaching it with the full instrument online. The tool does not replace God. The tool does not replace obedience. It does not surrender for you. It does not close the door for you. What God is doing in you is not conditional on any tool. But a tool that restores the receiver gives what God is doing more of what it was designed to land in. A restored mind does not make God more powerful. It makes you more capable of perceiving the power that was there all along. Now, I want to address something that I know some of you are thinking, because I have built trust with you over the last hour, and I do not want to leave this question unanswered. Some of you are thinking, if the problem is neurological and the solution is scientific, where does God fit? Does using a scientific tool to restore the brain diminish faith? Does it make the spiritual journey less spiritual? I want to answer that with a question. When you break your arm, do you pray for healing or do you go to the doctor? Most people answer both. And that answer is correct. Prayer addresses the spiritual dimension of healing. The doctor addresses the physical dimension, and nobody considers it a lack of faith to set a broken bone. Nobody accuses you of diminishing God by using the medical knowledge that God gave human beings the capacity to develop. The brain is an organ, like the heart, like the lungs, like the kidneys. It is subject to the same physical realities as every other organ. It can be damaged. It can be weakened. It can operate below its designed capacity, and it can be restored. Using the knowledge that God placed in the hands of researchers like Dr. Roger Sperry and practitioners like Dr. Daniel Barone is not a departure from faith. It is the application of faith in the fullest possible sense. Faith that God designed the brain for wholeness. Faith that the disconnection is not his design, but the result of a world that was not built to maintain it. And faith that restoration is available, not through wishing, through specific, targeted, scientifically grounded action that addresses the root cause at the root level. If that distinction resonates, if you feel the integration of faith and science as something that expands your understanding rather than threatening it, type the words "whole mind" in the comments, because that integration that willingness to hold both the spiritual and the scientific in the same hand without feeling like one diminishes the other, is the signature of spiritual maturity. And it is the exact posture that positions you to receive the fullness of what these 3 days carry. And for the chosen one who felt something stir when the mind restoration was described, who felt the quiet confirmation that this is not random, who understands that the instrument matters as much as the intention, that door is still open in the description and in the pinned comment. It is a small step, but small steps taken from a clear mind have changed entire seasons. Now, let me take you back into the deeper current of this message. Because the product section is complete and what remains is sacred, what remains is the part of this message that belongs to something larger than a tool, larger than a technique, larger than any mechanism I can name. What remains is the truth about who you are and what these 3 days are about to reveal. But before we cross that threshold, I need to prepare you for something, because most messages like this never say what I am about to say. And the omission of this truth is responsible for more missed windows than any other single factor. Here is the truth. What you have learned in this message so far is real. Every mechanism I named, every pattern I described, every breakthrough beat I walked you through, all of it is accurate. All of it is true. But without what comes next, without the deeper layer that I have been building towards since the first sentence, everything you have learned will work at a fraction of its capacity. Information without activation is like a key without a hand to turn it. You can hold the key. You can admire the key. You can understand exactly how the key works, which pin it lifts, which tumbler it releases. But if the hand that turns it is trembling, if the fingers are numb, if the grip is weak because the neurological system that controls fine motor function is running on half power, the key stays in the lock. Understood but unused. Accurate but ineffective. That would be the cruelest outcome. Not ignorance. Informed paralysis. And informed paralysis is the specialty of the hemisphere gap. It gives you enough left brain knowledge to feel smart, and enough right brain intuition to feel hopeful, but not enough integration to move. I have not named you completely yet. You are not only the chosen one. There is a more specific name for what you carry, and that name changes everything about how you move forward through this window. The name I am about to give you is not a label I invented. It is a name that emerges from the pattern of your life when you look at it from the right angle. You have been looking at your story from inside the fog, from inside the reduced capacity, from inside the fractured hemisphere. And from that angle, your story looks like a series of almost breakthrough, almost provision, almost clarity, almost peace, almost there. But from the angle of whole brain activation, from the angle of a synchronized mind that can see the full picture, your story does not look like almost at all. It looks like precision. Every delay was a calibration. Every disappointment was a redirection. Every closed door was a protection from something that would have arrived before you had the capacity to hold it. And the name that captures all of this, the name that rewrites your history from tragedy to strategy, is the appointed receiver. You are not a random person hoping for a blessing. You are an appointed receiver, specifically selected, specifically prepared, specifically positioned. And the appointment was not made this week. It was made before you were born. The window that opens tomorrow was scheduled at the same time your soul was assigned a body. The provision that will flow through it was sealed with your name. At the same moment, your name was sealed in the book of life. The only variable, the only thing that has been uncertain throughout this entire process, is the condition of the receiver at the moment of delivery. And that variable is not uncertain anymore. Let me tell you what happens when an appointed receiver comes fully online, because this is not theory for me. I have witnessed it. I have watched it unfold in real time. And the speed at which things change is the most surprising part. The first thing that happens is perception shifts. Not dramatically, subtly. You start noticing things you have been walking past. Opportunities that were always there but invisible. Connections that were always available but unrecognized. Patterns in your circumstances that suddenly make sense when they never made sense before. It is as if someone turned up the resolution on your life. The same picture, the same scene, the same circumstances, but now you can see the details, and the details change everything. The second thing that happens is response speed. The gap between receiving guidance and acting on it shrinks, not because you become more impulsive, because you become more integrated. The right hemisphere senses the direction, the left hemisphere confirms the path, and the action follows naturally, without the war between doubt and intuition that used to paralyze you for days or weeks while the opportunity quietly expired. The third thing that happens is relational clarity. This one surprises people the most. When both hemispheres come online, your ability to read people, to sense motives, to discern who is for you and who is against you, sharpens dramatically. Relationships that were confusing become clear. Boundaries that were impossible to draw become obvious. And connections that were meant to be activated, relationships that God positioned in your life for this exact season, suddenly come into focus. The fourth thing, and this is the one that connects most directly to the 3-day window, is spiritual reception. The ability to hear God clearly, not through more prayer, not through more meditation, through a receiver that is no longer filtering 90% of the signal. When both hemispheres are synchronized, prayer stops being a monologue and becomes a dialogue. Not because God starts speaking louder, because you stop being deaf to the frequency he was always speaking at. Imagine experiencing all 4 of those shifts before June 20th arrives. Imagine waking up tomorrow with perception sharp, response speed fast, relational clarity high, and spiritual reception open. Imagine approaching the day of clearing with the full capacity to discern what is being cleared, to release what needs releasing, and to hold on to what needs keeping. Imagine entering the day of receiving with a receiver so clear that every drop of what God pours lands exactly where it was designed to land. Imagine standing in the day of declaration with both hemispheres firing, both halves of your mind unified, your voice carrying the frequency of a whole person, a complete instrument, a restored selim of the living God. That is not a fantasy. That is what 18,000 people have reported after using the 8-minute targeted auditory sequence that Dr. Barone and his team developed. Not all of them are spiritual. Not all of them use the language I am using, but the mechanism does not require spiritual language to work. It requires a brain, and it requires 8 minutes. Now, I want to build something that goes beyond the mechanism, because the mechanism is real and it matters. But the deeper current of this message is not about a tool, it is about a truth. And the truth is this: you were designed for more than you are currently experiencing, not marginally more, exponentially more. The version of you that operates at full capacity, the version with both hemispheres synchronized, the version that was your default setting before the world dimmed it, that version is not a theoretical construct. It is a biological reality that has been suppressed, and the suppression has spiritual consequences. Because when the instrument is diminished, the music it can play is diminished. And when the music is diminished, the audience that was meant to be moved by it never hears the full symphony. Your family is that audience. Your community is that audience. The generations that come after you are that audience. and they have been listening to a diminished version of the song you were designed to play. Not because you chose to play softly, because the instrument was operating at 30%. And 30% of a symphony is background noise. Pleasant, but forgettable. Nice, but not life-changing. These 3 days are the moment the volume returns, the moment the instrument comes back online, the moment the background noise becomes a symphony again. And the symphony does not just change your experience, it changes the room. It changes everyone in it. It changes the trajectory of every life connected to yours. You lie there for a moment, not thinking, feeling, the absence of the weight you carried for years, feeling the space where the fog used to live, now open and clear like a window washed clean after a storm. The first thought that arrives is not worry. It is not a task list. It is not a rehearsal of everything that could go wrong. The first thought is a question, gentle and unhurried. What am I being called to today? And the answer comes, not as a thought, as a knowing, clear, specific, unmistakable. The kind of knowing you used to have as a child, before the world taught you to doubt everything your spirit told you. The kind of knowing that does not need evidence, because it is evidence. You lie there and you feel it settle into your chest like a warm stone, solid and sure. And you realize that this is what mornings were supposed to feel like. This is what life was supposed to feel like. Not the grinding survival you had normalized. This ease, this clarity, this connection between the deepest part of who you are and the clearest part of how you think. You get up, you move through your morning, and something is different in the way people respond to you. Your children look at you differently. Your partner speaks to you differently. Not because you announced a change, because you are radiating something that was not there 6 months ago. Wholeness. The kind that does not need to be explained. The kind that shifts the atmosphere of a room before a single word is spoken. That is the version of you that the 3-day window is designed to activate. That is what waits on the other side of the Kairos rupture. Not a theory, not a hope. A lived reality that 18,000 people have described in their own words, in their own ways, with their own specific details that I am not allowed to share but that I have witnessed with my own eyes. The gap between who you are right now and who you are in that morning scene is not years, it is not months, it is one decision, one restoration, one 8-minute session that reactivates what the modern world switched off. And the timing of that decision, the timing of that restoration, happening now, happening before the window opens, is not coincidence. It is divine coordination at a level that should take your breath away. I cannot tell you the exact day everything shifts. I am not a prophet. I have never claimed to be. Anyone who tells you the exact day your life changes is telling you what you want to hear, not what they actually know. What I can tell you is the pattern. The pattern is that when the receiver comes fully online, the things that were waiting for full reception begin to arrive. Not on my schedule, not on a 30-day guarantee. On the schedule that was written before time, adjusted in real time, and delivered with precision to the person who is awake enough to receive. That person is you. I have seen the pattern long enough to recognize it. And you carry every marker of a person who is standing at the threshold of the most significant shift of their adult life. Not because of anything I said, because of everything God did before you pressed play on this message. Now I want to descend into something that this message has been building toward since the beginning. And it is the part that no tool can give you, no mechanism can activate, no science can measure. It is the part that belongs exclusively to the relationship between you and the one who chose you. There is a depth to divine choosing that most people never explore. They hear the phrase, chosen one, and they think of it as a category, a group, a label applied broadly to a type of person. But choosing, in the biblical sense, in the original language sense, is not broad. It is surgical. It is specific. It is intimate in a way that should make you uncomfortable, because intimacy at that level means you cannot hide. God did not choose a type. God chose you, with your specific wounds, with your specific gifts, with your specific failures, and your specific moments of unexpected grace, with the exact combination of brokenness and beauty that makes you irreplaceable in the tapestry of what He is building. Not interchangeable, irreplaceable. There is no substitute for you, no backup plan, no second choice waiting in the wings. If you do not walk through this window, what was designed to flow through you does not flow through someone else. It does not flow, period. It waits. It remains in the spiritual vault, assigned but undelivered, sealed but unclaimed, carrying your name but sitting in a room that nobody visits. I want you to feel the weight of that, not as pressure, as significance. You matter at a level that the fog has been preventing you from recognizing. The reduced version of you that has been showing up every day, doing its best, surviving, coping, managing, that version has been enough to keep the lights on. But it has not been enough to open the vault, and the vault has been waiting, patient, persistent, sealed with a lock that only your full capacity mind can open. This is why the timing of this message is not casual. This is why the 3-day window is not generic. This is why everything, the fog lifting, the receiver restoration, the kairos rupture, the clearing and receiving and declaring, all of it converges on these 72 hours with the precision of a surgical instrument, because what is in the vault is time-sensitive, not in the sense that it expires, in the sense that the world needs it now. The people connected to you need it now. The generation waiting for the pattern to break needs it now. And now, in this context, means June 20th through 22nd. Let me take you into a breakthrough that I have been holding for this moment in the message, because I saved it deliberately. I saved it for the point where the product section is behind us, where the mechanism has been explained, where the science has been laid, and the only thing left is truth. Raw, unmediated, uncomfortable truth about a pattern that has been operating in your life that you have not only been unaware of, but have been actively defending. The pattern is what I call the comfort addiction, and it is the most sophisticated form of self-sabotage I have ever encountered, because it does not look like self-sabotage. It looks like wisdom. It looks like self-care. It looks like knowing your limits. And it is killing your destiny one comfortable day at a time. The comfort addiction works like this. Your nervous system has a set point, a baseline level of stimulation, challenge, growth, and discomfort that it considers normal. When you drop below that set point, you get bored, restless, agitated. You seek more. But when you rise above it, when the challenge increases, when the growth accelerates, when the discomfort of expansion pushes past what the set point considers safe, the nervous system pulls you back. Not through pain, through comfort. It generates a craving for the familiar, a desire to retreat to what you know, a sudden urgency to rest, to pause, to take a break, to stop pushing, to honor your boundaries, to be kind to yourself. And every single one of those impulses sounds healthy. Every single one of them would be appropriate advice from a therapist, and every single one of them, in the context of a kairos window, is the comfort addiction disguising retreat as self-care. And here is the mechanism underneath it that makes it solvable rather than just nameable. The set point is not fixed, it is neurological. It was calibrated by years of experience, years of hemisphere disconnection, years of operating at reduced capacity. The foggy brain has a low set point because it does not have the processing power to handle high stimulation, high growth, high expansion. so it calibrates for comfort. And once calibrated, it defends that comfort with everything it has. But when the hemispheres come back into sync, when the fog lifts, when the processing power returns, the set point recalibrates automatically. Not through willpower, not through pushing past your limits, through the simple act of restoring the capacity that makes higher limits feel normal instead of threatening. The comfort addiction dissolves not because you fought it, but because the brain no longer needs it. The expanded state stops feeling dangerous because the brain now has the architecture to navigate it. But the bridge can be restored, and the restoration takes 8 minutes. Now, I want to take you somewhere sacred, because we have been in the realm of mechanism and pattern for a long time, and your spirit needs something different now. Your spirit needs water. And the water I want to give you is this. You are known, not in the general sense, not in the way a teacher knows a student or a pastor knows a congregation member, known in the way that only the one who designed you can know you, known in the way that includes every secret thought, every midnight prayer, every tear that fell when no one was watching, every moment of doubt that you never admitted to anyone because you were afraid it would disqualify you from the blessing. It does not disqualify you. Nothing disqualifies you. And the assignment stands regardless of how foggy your brain has been, regardless of how many windows you have missed, regardless of how long the delay identity has kept you in the waiting room, regardless of how loudly the unworthiness loop has been whispering that this is for someone better. The assignment stands. It has always stood. And these 3 days are the moment the assignment moves from the vault to the visible. I want to take you even deeper into what these 3 days carry specifically for your internal world. Because the external shifts, the provision, the connections, the opportunities, those will come. But they come as a result of something that happens inside first. And the internal shift that these 3 days are designed to produce is something I can only describe as a recalibration of the soul. There is a state that I have observed in people who are about to cross a major threshold. It is a state of profound disorientation that feels like it should be a sign that something is going wrong, but is actually a sign that something is going very right. I call it the threshold tremor. The threshold tremor is what happens when the old version of you begins to die and the new version has not yet fully formed. It feels like standing between two worlds, 1 foot in the familiar, 1 foot in the unknown. Neither world feels stable. The familiar has lost its grip because you have seen too much truth to go back. The unknown has not yet solidified because you have not yet stepped fully into it. And in between, you tremble, not with fear, with transformation. Think about the caterpillar in the cocoon. There is a moment in that process where the caterpillar has dissolved, but the butterfly has not yet formed. The creature is neither one thing nor the other. It is a soup of potential, raw material in transition. And if you open the cocoon at that moment, you would see something that looks like destruction. Something that looks like the end, but it is not the end. It is the most creative moment of the entire process. The moment when everything that was is being reorganized into everything that will be. That is where you are right now, in the tremor. The 3-day window does not create the transformation. The transformation has been underway for longer than you realize. The 3-day window catalyzes it, accelerates it, takes the slow dissolution of the old and the gradual formation of the new, and compresses it into 72 hours of concentrated metamorphosis. Now there is something I want to address about doubt. Because even at this point in the message, even after everything I have shared, some of you are carrying a specific kind of doubt that I have not yet named. And it is the most painful kind. It is not doubt about God. You believe in God. That is not the issue. It is not doubt about the 3-day window. You sense it is real. Something in your spirit has been confirming it since the first paragraph. It is not doubt about the science. The Nobel Prize is not something you argue with. The kind of doubt you are carrying is doubt about yourself. The quiet, persistent belief that even if the window is real, even if the tool exists, even if the mechanism is sound, it will not work for you, because nothing works for you, because you are the exception, because your situation is different, because your fog is thicker, your struggle is deeper, your history is darker, your obstacles are more entrenched than anyone else listening to this message. I want to name that doubt for what it is, not lack of faith, not humility, not realism. It is the fourth type of resistance I mentioned earlier, the resistance of the person who has exempted themselves from possibility, who has built a case so airtight for why they cannot receive that not even God can get through the legal brief they have prepared. And I am not going to dismantle that case. I do not have the authority to. If it is real, you gain everything. If it is not, you lose nothing except a few minutes of openness. The risk is not in believing. The risk is in the alternative, in maintaining the exemption, in holding on to the doubt that protects you from disappointment, but also protects you from transformation, because you cannot be protected from disappointment and open to transformation at the same time. The same wall that keeps the pain out keeps the blessing out. And at some point, you have to decide which side of the wall you want to live on. I am not asking you to tear the wall down. I am asking you to open a window, just enough to let the air in, just enough to feel the breeze, just enough to test whether the atmosphere on the other side is different from the one you have been breathing for years. The Kairos rupture opens tomorrow. The window in the wall can open tonight. The choice is yours. And whatever you choose, I want you to know that the assignment does not change. Whether you open the window today or in 6 months or in 5 years, the vault still carries your name. The provision is still sealed with your signature. The calling is still active. Nothing expires. But timing matters. And the timing right now, this week, these 3 days, is the most aligned your life has been with the schedule of heaven since you drew your first breath. Let me also address the financial concern directly, because I know it exists for some of you. $39 is not nothing. For some listening to this, $39 is a careful decision, and I honor that. I do not dismiss it. I do not minimize it. If $39 is a stretch, I want you to know that the money-back guarantee is unconditional. You can experience the full sequence, evaluate it honestly, and if it does not produce the shift that 18,000 people have described, every dollar returns. That is not a gamble. That is a zero-risk encounter with something that could recalibrate the trajectory of your life. And if $39 is genuinely beyond reach right now, the clarity protocol I taught you earlier in this message is free. It is not a replacement for the full restoration that neural sync technology provides, but it is a start. And God honors starts. He honors the person who takes the step they can take, even when the full staircase is not visible. The resource is in the description and in the pinned comment for those whose spirit confirmed it. That is the last time I will mention it. Everything that remains in this message belongs entirely to something else, something deeper, something that no tool can replace and no mechanism can provide. The conversation between you and the one who chose you. Now, I want to take you into a revelation that I believe is the most important thing I will say in this entire message, and it has nothing to do with neuroscience. It has nothing to do with hemisphere synchronization. It has nothing to do with any tool or technique or method. It is about identity, pure, unmediated, irreducible identity. You have been carrying a question, maybe consciously, maybe unconsciously, but it has been with you for as long as you can remember. And the question is this: am I enough? Not am I good enough, not am I spiritual enough, not am I smart enough, or disciplined enough, or faithful enough. Am I enough? Period. Am I sufficient? Is there something at the core of who I am that is not merely adequate but necessary? Is there something about my existence that the universe would miss if I disappeared? Is there a hole in the fabric of creation that is exactly my shape, that only I can fill, that would remain empty forever if I did not step into it? The answer is yes. Not a qualified yes, not a yes with conditions, not a yes if you improve, or yes when you are ready, or yes after you fix the thing that is broken. Yes, now, as you are, with the fog and the doubt and the exhaustion and the hemisphere disconnection and the generational echo and every mechanism I named and every mechanism I did not name. Yes, you are enough. You are necessary. You are irreplaceable. And the 3-day window that opens tomorrow is not God giving you a chance to become enough. It is God declaring that you always were. That the fog did not change your status. That the disconnection did not alter your assignment. That the years of reduced capacity did not diminish your worth by a single fraction. You were chosen at full value. You were assigned at full potential. And the restoration that is coming is not the event that makes you worthy of the assignment. It is the event that allows you to finally operate at the level the assignment always required. The assignment was never reduced to match your capacity. Your capacity is about to be restored to match the assignment. That distinction is everything. If you feel it in your body right now, if something just shifted in the way you are holding yourself, sit with it. Do not rush past it. Do not move to the next paragraph until you have let this one land. You are enough. You are always enough. And starting tomorrow, the world is going to see what enough looks like when it is no longer hidden behind the fog. Now let me take you into one of the most profound dynamics of these 3 specific days, because there is a reason God chose a Friday, a Saturday, and a Sunday, and the reason is not calendrical convenience. It is architectural. Saturday is the day of rest, the original Sabbath, the day that was designed from the creation of the world, as the day when human beings stop producing and start receiving. God chose this as the day of receiving because it aligns with the oldest rhythm in existence. On the 7th day, God rested, not because he was tired, because he was modeling. He was showing humanity that there is a mode of being that is not about doing. It is about opening. And the opening is where the pouring happens. Sunday is the day of resurrection, the day when death was reversed, the day when the tomb that was supposed to be permanent turned out to be temporary. God chose this as the day of declaration because declaration is the language of resurrection. When you speak what has been deposited in you, you are doing what the stone did when it rolled away. You are opening the tomb. You are letting the world see what was hidden. You are declaring that what looked dead is alive. What looked finished is beginning. What looked over is only just starting. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Clearing, receiving, declaring. Depletion, rest, resurrection. The architecture is not random. It is ancient. It follows the deepest pattern in the universe, the pattern of death and rebirth, the pattern of emptying and filling, the pattern of ending and beginning. And you are entering this pattern not as a spectator but as a participant, not watching the story unfold but being the character in it. Let me give you another breakthrough now, because we are deep in the terrain and I want to make sure that what I am building is not just comprehensive but transformative. I want you to leave this message not just informed, but different. And the next mechanism I want to name is the one that explains the specific pattern you have noticed in your finances, your career, and your material provision. I call it the provision blindness. The provision blindness is not about lack. Most chosen ones are not truly lacking provision. They are lacking the capacity to see it. The provision is there. It has been there. God did not forget to send it. He sent it on schedule. He placed it within your reach, and you walked past it. Not because you were careless, because you were foggy. Because the receiver that is responsible for recognizing provision when it shows up, the combination of pattern recognition, intuitive sensing, and logical evaluation that together produce the ability to spot an opportunity, was running at 30%. Think about this. How many conversations have you had in the last year where someone mentioned something, an opportunity, a connection, a resource, and you heard it but did not register it? How many emails have you received that contained information that could have changed your trajectory, and you skimmed them and moved on? How many people have God placed in your path who were carrying something for you, a referral, a partnership, a piece of information, and you walked past them because your mind was too foggy to recognize what they were holding? The provision was there. The provision is always there. God does not withhold from the chosen one. What happens is that the receiver operating at reduced capacity generates a perceptual filter that screens out anything that does not match the current pattern. And the current pattern is struggle. So the foggy brain filters for struggle. It sees the obstacles, it sees the delays, it sees the closed doors, and it misses the open ones. Because open doors do not match the pattern it has been calibrated to recognize. Restore the calibration, restore the whole brain activation, and suddenly the open doors become visible. The provision that was always within reach stops being invisible and starts being obvious. The conversation you would have glossed over last week becomes the turning point this week. The email you would have skimmed becomes the bridge. The person you would have walked past becomes the connection that changes everything. That is not magic. That is neuroscience. The brain sees what it is calibrated to see, and calibration is a function of hemisphere synchronization. When both halves work together, the calibration shifts from survival to reception, from filtering out opportunity to filtering for it. From a brain that says nothing is happening to a brain that says, wait, look at that. Now, I want to paint you a picture of the second dimension of the future that these 3 days carry. Close your eyes again if you are able. Picture yourself 8 months from now, not just the morning, the life. Now, I want to take you into one final mechanism before we enter the sacred closing of this message. And this one is the most personal, because it operates not at the level of your brain or your nervous system, but at the level of your story. The narrative you tell yourself about who you are and why your life looks the way it does. The narration trap sounds like this. I am the kind of person who always struggles. Things never come easy for me. Other people get breaks. I get obstacles. I am not lucky. I am not favored. I am just the one who keeps going despite everything. That narrative feels true because it is based on true events. You did struggle. Things did not come easy. You did face more obstacles than seemed fair. All of that is real. But the narrative is not the events. The narrative is the interpretation of the events. And the interpretation was made by a brain running at 30%. A brain that was calibrated for survival, not for reception. A brain that was wired to see patterns of difficulty because difficulty was the dominant experience, and the brain, as we discussed, sees what it is calibrated to see. The events were real. The interpretation was foggy. and the foggy interpretation became the story, and the story became the identity, and the identity became the filter through which every new experience was processed, and the filter ensured that every new experience confirmed the story. Struggle in, struggle out. Difficulty in, difficulty out. Almost in, almost out. The narration trap is a self-reinforcing loop that cannot be broken by changing the narrative. It can only be broken by changing the brain that wrote the narrative. Because once the brain comes fully online, once both hemispheres are synchronized, the events do not change, but the interpretation does. The struggle is recontextualized, not as evidence that you are unlucky, but as evidence that you are being prepared. The difficulty is reframed not as punishment, but as calibration. The almost is recognized not as failure, but as proximity. And the new interpretation creates a new narrative. And the new narrative creates a new identity. And the new identity creates a new filter. And the new filter starts attracting experiences that match not the old story, but the true story. The story of a chosen one who was never unlucky, who was never unfavored, who was being prepared, calibrated, positioned, and protected for a moment exactly like this one. The 3-day window does not just change your circumstances, it changes your story. It rewrites the narrative from the inside out, and the rewritten narrative becomes the foundation for everything that follows. Not a story of survival, a story of arrival. Not a story of almost, a story of finally. Not a story of the person who kept going despite everything. A story of the person who arrived because of everything. That is who you are. That is the true interpretation of your life when seen through the lens of whole brain activation. And that is the interpretation that these 3 days are designed to install. Not as a belief you have to maintain through effort. As a perception you cannot unsee once the fog lifts. We are entering the final movement of this message now. And what comes next is not information. It is not mechanism. It is not science. What comes next is sacred. And I ask you to receive it not with your mind, but with the deepest part of who you are. The part that existed before the fog. The part that will exist after the fog lifts. The part that has been waiting patiently, persistently, faithfully for this exact moment. Stay with me. We are almost home. I want to take you into a guided moment now. Not a teaching, not an explanation, an experience. Because there is a part of you that does not learn through words. It learns through sensation, through imagery, through the quiet activation of the deepest layers of your being. And that part has been waiting patiently for its turn. Close your eyes if you are in a place where you can do that safely. If you cannot close your eyes, let your gaze soften. Let the edges of your vision blur. Let the world around you fade into the background, while the world inside you comes into focus. I want you to picture a room. It is not a room you have seen before, but it is a room you recognize. You recognize it the way you recognize a song you heard in childhood, not from the melody, but from the feeling it carries. The room is warm, not with temperature, with presence. There is a quality of light in this room that does not come from a lamp or a window. It comes from everywhere at once. Soft, golden, steady. The kind of light that does not cast shadows because it fills every corner equally. You are standing in the center of this room, and as you stand there, you become aware of your body in a way you have not been aware of it in a long time. Start at your feet. Feel them on the ground. Feel the weight of your body pressing downward. Feel the ground pressing back. That pressure, that mutual holding between your body and the earth, is the physical manifestation of a spiritual truth. You are held, not by the ground, by something beneath the ground, something older than the ground, something that was holding you before the ground existed. Move your attention upward, your ankles, your calves, your knees. Feel the tension that lives in each of these places, not the tension of right now, the accumulated tension of years, the stored weight of every step you took while carrying something that was not yours to carry, the residue of every day you showed up at half capacity and pretended it was full. Do not try to release it yet. Just feel it. Just notice it. Just acknowledge that it is there and that it has been there for a long time and that you have been so accustomed to carrying it that you forgot it was not part of your original design. The next, disappointment. And it has been gripping for so long that the muscles have molded themselves around the expectation. They do not know how to let go, not because they are broken, because they need permission. And permission comes from a mind that is whole enough to say, it is safe to release. The impact is not coming. The window is open. It is time to let go. That ache is not weakness. That ache is the tselem. It is the shadow sensing the shape of the object that cast it. It is you sensing the shape of the fullness you were designed for while living in the reduced version. And the ache has been your compass. Every time you felt it, it was pointing you toward the window. Every time it intensified, the window was getting closer. And right now, in this moment, the ache is at its most intense because the window has never been closer. It opens tomorrow. Now I want you to do something that might feel strange. I want you to place your left hand on your right shoulder and your right hand on your left shoulder. Cross your arms across your chest and hold yourself the way you would hold someone you love who is hurting. Not tight, firm, present. Feel the weight of your own arms around your own body. Feel the warmth of your own hands through your own clothes. And as you hold yourself, I want you to say these words, not out loud if you cannot. In your mind is enough, but if you can, out loud is better. I am here. I am whole. I am not what the fog told me I was. I am not what the years of reduced capacity showed me in the mirror. I am the original design. I am the full signal. I am the complete tselem. And starting tomorrow, the world is going to meet the version of me that has been waiting behind the fog. Not a new version, the real version. The version God drew before the fog existed. Hold the position for a moment longer. Feel the bilateral activation. Left hand, right shoulder, right hand, left shoulder. Both hemispheres receiving a signal. Both hemispheres momentarily bridged. And in that bridge, in that small window of clarity, let something land. Let the truth of what you just declared descend from your mind into your chest. From your chest into your belly, from your belly into the deepest part of you that is beyond words and beyond doubt and beyond the reach of any mechanism I named. Let it land, and then slowly, gently release your arms. Open your eyes if they were closed, and notice if something shifted, even slightly, even a fraction, because that fraction is the beginning. That fraction is the first taste of what full activation feels like. And the full version, the complete restoration, is what these 3 days carry. Now, I am going to enter the sacred closing of this message, and I want you to receive it not as a listener, but as a participant, because what I am about to speak is not information, it is declaration. It is the act of sealing in the spiritual realm what has been opened in the physical realm, and your agreement, your presence, your attention is part of the mechanism. I see it, God sees it, and the 3-day window that opens tomorrow is not a reward. Rewards are for performance. This is recognition. It is God saying, I saw every day. I counted every step. I measured every ounce of faith you spent on a promise that had not yet materialized, and none of it was wasted. None of it was invisible. Every single moment of it was building the capacity you need for what I am about to pour. You did not endure for nothing. You endured for this. You can be trusted. Not because you are perfect, because you are persistent. And persistence, in the kingdom of God, is the currency that purchases entry into rooms that talent and intelligence and connections cannot open. You persisted your way here, and here is where the door opens. Let me go deeper into the clearing now, because the guided moment you just experienced was the doorway. What comes next is the room behind the door. There is a weight that you have been carrying that does not belong to you. I am not speaking metaphorically. I am speaking to a specific burden that was placed on your shoulders at a specific time in your life, and you have been carrying it so long that you have confused it with your own spine. You think it is part of your structure. You think removing it would make you collapse. But it is not structure, it is load. And there is a profound difference between the frame that holds you up and the weight that pushes you down. The frame is your calling. The frame is your purpose. The frame is the God-given architecture of who you are, the irreducible core that existed before the fog, before the hemisphere disconnection, before the world piled its expectations and its disappointments on top of you. The frame cannot be removed because the frame is you. The weight is everything else. The weight is the expectation of someone who needed you to be smaller so they could feel larger. The weight is the standard of someone who never achieved what they projected onto you. The weight is the failure of a system that was supposed to support you but instead used you as its foundation. The weight is the grief of a loss that was never fully mourned, a goodbye that was never fully said, a door that was never fully closed, because closing it felt like admitting that what was behind it was really over. Name it, not out loud, in your mind. Give it a name, see it clearly, and then I want you to do something that the foggy brain would never allow. I want you to set it down, not throw it away, not reject it, not pretend it never mattered. Set it down the way you would set down a suitcase at the end of a very long journey, with acknowledgement, with gratitude for the strength it took to carry it, and with the clear, whole-brained recognition that the journey that required you to carry it is over. The next journey requires empty hands, because what God is about to hand you during this 3-day window cannot be received by hands that are already full. Set it down. Feel the lightness. Feel the space. Feel the openness in your chest where the weight used to press. And know that what just happened in this moment, this setting down, this releasing, this choosing to arrive at the window with empty hands instead of full arms, this is the clearing. This is day one beginning early. This is God saying, I am not waiting until midnight. I am starting now because you showed up ready. And readiness is the only clock I operate on. Now I want to address the specific fear that surfaces when the weight is set down. Because setting down a weight you have carried for years does not just produce lightness, it produces vertigo. The body has been leaning into the weight for so long that when the weight is removed, the body does not straighten. It stumbles. It overcompensates. It reaches backward for the weight because the weight was its reference point. Its center of gravity was calibrated to the load. This is the moment of maximum vulnerability, the moment between setting down the old and picking up the new, the moment when you are standing with empty hands and the fog whispers, you should not have done that. You should have held on. You need that weight. Without it, you are nothing. Without the struggle, you have no identity. Without the burden, you have no story. Without the pain, you have no depth. And in that moment, if the hemispheres are connected, if the bridge is active, if the full processing power of your mind is online, you can hear the lie for what it is and dismiss it. You can feel the vertigo and recognize it as recalibration rather than collapse. But if the hemispheres are disconnected, if the bridge is down, if the fog is thick, the vertigo becomes terror, the emptiness becomes void, the silence becomes evidence that you made a mistake, and you reach back for the weight, You pick it up again. You settle it onto your shoulders with the grim familiarity of someone putting on chains they know by feel. And the window opens and closes, while you stand there, carrying what you were supposed to have left on the ground. Not this time, not during this window, because tonight before you sleep, you have access to something those other windows did not offer. A way to restore the bridge before the clearing begins in full. A way to ensure that when the vertigo hits, and it will hit, you have the neurological architecture to recognize it as transformation rather than destruction. The 8-minute sequence. The targeted auditory restoration. The tool that gives your faith the clear instrument it needs to function at full power. The link is in the description. The link is in the pinned comment. And the window opens tomorrow. Now let me take you into one final layer of understanding before the declarations, because there is one more thing I need you to see. And it is perhaps the most important thing I will say in this entire message. The 3-day window is not a test. I need you to hear that. It is not God evaluating whether you are ready. It is not a final exam that determines whether you pass into the next season. It is not an obstacle course where one wrong step sends you back to the beginning. It is a gift, pure, unearned, unconditional gift. The provision was sealed before you did anything to deserve it. The window was scheduled before you demonstrated anything worthy of it. The clearing was planned before you showed up with anything to show for yourself. You do not earn a kairos rupture, you enter one. And the entering is not about being good enough, it is about being present enough. It is about showing up with whatever you have, even if what you have is exhaustion and doubt and a brain running at 30%, and saying, "Here I am, I brought everything I have. It is not much, but I am here." And God says, "That is enough. It was always enough. You were always enough. Now let me show you what I can do with enough." That is the grace of the window. It does not require perfection. It requires presence. And presence, true presence, the kind that is not just physical but neurological, spiritual, emotional, and mental, is the product of a whole brain, a restored receiver, a mind that is no longer fighting itself but functioning as the unified instrument it was designed to be. I want to speak now to the chosen one who is listening at 3 in the morning, the one who could not sleep, the one who opened this message not because they planned to, but because something would not let them rest until they did. You are not an insomniac. You are an interceptor. Your spirit intercepted this message because what it carries is too important to wait until morning. And the fact that you are hearing it now, in the quiet hours when the world is asleep and the veil between dimensions is thinnest, is not a sign that something is wrong with your sleep cycle. It is a sign that something is right with your assignment. These 3 days were scheduled with your name, your specific name, not a generic blessing for a general audience. A targeted, personalized, individually calibrated opening that matches the exact shape of what you have been carrying, the exact contour of what you need, and the exact frequency of the version of you that is about to emerge. You are wrong that this is the same as what came before, because what came before did not name the mechanism. What came before did not explain the neurology. What came before told you to believe harder. This message told you why believing harder was not enough, and what the actual root is. And the root is addressable. And the address is not more faith, it is a restored receiver. And I want to speak to the chosen one who is crying right now, the one whose tears started somewhere around the middle of this message and have not stopped. The tears are not sadness, they are recognition. They are the body releasing what the mind has been holding back. They are the physical evidence that something deeper than comprehension is happening. Something is moving in the deepest strata of your being. Something that was stuck is flowing. Something that was frozen is melting. Something that was dead is coming back to life. Let the tears come. Do not wipe them. Do not apologize for them. Do not explain them away. They are the clearing beginning. They are day one arriving early. They are God saying, I see you. I have always seen you. And what is coming is worth every tear you have ever shed. Now I release over your life the following declarations, and I ask you, if your spirit agrees, to type Amen after each one, not as a formality, as an act of alignment, as a spoken seal in the spiritual realm. I declare that the fog lifts, not gradually, not over weeks. The fog lifts, starting tonight, starting now. The hemisphere disconnection that has kept you operating at reduced capacity is addressed. The bridge is restored. The receiver comes online. And the clarity that floods in is not temporary. It is the new normal. It is the permanent state. The fog was the anomaly. Clarity was always the design. I declare that the 3-day window opens for you specifically, not for the masses, not for a general audience, for you, with your name, with your assignment, with the provision that has been sealed in your vault since before you were born. The clearing begins tomorrow. The receiving follows. The declaration completes it, and nothing, no guardian, no paradox, no collapse, no terror, no addiction, no trap, none of it has the authority to stand between you and what has been assigned. I declare that the generational echo dies in your body. The patterns that were inherited without consent, the fears that were absorbed without awareness, the limitations that were modeled without malice but carried without permission, all of it ends. You are the generation where the cycle breaks. You are the one whose children will tell the story of the person who stopped passing down the chains and started passing down the keys. I declare that your identity is not the fog. Your identity is not the struggle. Your identity is not the almost. Your identity is the appointed receiver who was chosen before time, prepared through fire, and positioned for a window that the entire architecture of your life has been building toward. You are not late. You are deep. You are not slow. You are solid. You are not behind. You are being revealed. I declare that what begins tomorrow does not end on June 22nd. June 22nd is the beginning of the beginning. The Kairos rupture is the catalyst, not the conclusion. And the life that flows from these 3 days, the clarity, the provision, the connections, the calling activation, the relational healing, the financial movement, all of it continues. All of it compounds, all of it accelerates. Because a restored receiver does not receive once, it receives continuously. And the continuous reception of what God has been sending all along is the definition of the abundant life you were promised, but had not yet been able to fully access. I declare abundance, not the version the world offers, the version God designed, the version that begins with a clear mind and flows outward into every dimension of your existence. Financial abundance that arrives not through striving but through clarity. Relational abundance that arrives not through fixing but through presence. Spiritual abundance that arrives not through more effort but through a restored receiver that can finally hold the weight of what has been waiting. I declare protection over these 3 days, over your sleep, over your waking, over every conversation, every interaction, every moment of stillness, and every moment of movement. The threshold guardian has no access. The arrival paradox has no power. The discernment collapse has no ground to stand on, because the bridge is being restored. And a restored bridge carries the traffic of heaven without congestion, without delay, without the bottleneck that has been filtering your blessings for years. I declare it sealed. I declare it done. I declare it irreversible. And now, chosen one, I want to speak the final words of this message, not to your mind, but to the part of you that was listening before the words began. You made it to the end, not because you were entertained, not because you were curious, because something in you recognized that this message was carrying something that belongs to you. Something that was placed here in this exact form, at this exact time, for you specifically. You did not find this message, it found you. And the fact that you received the entire thing, every mechanism, every breakthrough, every named concept, every declaration, is the first evidence that the receiver is already beginning to come online. Go into these 3 days awake. Go into them clear. Go into them knowing that you are the appointed receiver, chosen before time, prepared through every season you have survived, and positioned right now, right here, for the most significant spiritual opening of your entire life. If you need to hear this one more time before you sleep, listen again. If you need to share this with someone who needs to hear it before tomorrow, share it now. If you need to position yourself with the tool that restores the receiver before the window opens, the link is in the description and the pinned comment. But above all, if you need to know that you are not alone in this, that someone sees you, that someone recognizes the weight you have been carrying and the faithfulness you have maintained in the face of silence, know this. You are seen. You are known. You are chosen. And the 3-day window that begins in a matter of hours is the beginning of everything changing. Type I, receive it, all in the comments if your spirit confirms what has been spoken. I declare that tomorrow morning, when you open your eyes, the first thing you feel is not the weight. The first thing you feel is the space where the weight used to be. And in that space, a warmth. And in that warmth, a knowing. And in that knowing, a readiness that you have not felt in years, maybe decades, maybe ever, because this level of readiness was never available to you before. It required the full instrument, and the full instrument is coming back online. I declare over your finances that the provision blindness ends, that the opportunities which have been circling your life, waiting for a clear receiver to notice them, become visible, that the ideas which have been trying to land in your consciousness, blocked by the fog, break through, that the connections which God positioned in your path, carrying something with your name on it, announce themselves with a clarity you cannot miss and a timing you cannot deny. I declare over your relationships that the fog between you and the people you love lifts, that the defensiveness softens, that the assumptions dissolve, that the person standing in front of you becomes visible again, not as the projection of your wounded brain, but as the human being they actually are, and that in that clarity, something heals, something that counseling could not reach, something that conversation could not touch, something that required a level of presence that only a whole brain can provide. I declare over your health that the heaviness in your body is not permanent, that the aches that have no explanation are the body holding trauma that the mind was too foggy to process, and that when the mind comes fully online, the body releases what it has been storing, not all at once, but steadily, clearly, in the way that water finds its way out of a vessel that has been tilted, naturally, inevitably, completely. I declare over your calling that the assignment activates, not in theory, in practice, that the next step becomes visible, that the pathway from where you are to where you are meant to be stops being a fog-covered maze and starts being a lit corridor, that you do not have to figure it all out before you move. You only have to see the next step, and the next step is illuminated by a mind that is whole. I declare over your children that they will know a different version of their parent, a version that is present, clear, whole, a version that does not react from depletion, but responds from fullness. A version that models what it looks like when the cycle breaks, when the echo dies, when the fog lifts, when someone in the family line finally wakes up and stays awake. They will not have to carry what you carried. They will not have to fight the fight you fought. Because you are ending it. Here, now. In this window, if your spirit has been confirming throughout this message, if you have felt the shifts, the recognition, the tears, the loosening in your chest, the warmth in your hands, the alertness in your mind that was not there when you started listening, I want you to receive one final word. The word is not a concept. It is not a mechanism. It is not a technique. The word is this: you are loved. Not for what you do, not for how well you perform, not for how consistently you show up, not for the battles you have won or the standards you have maintained. You are loved for who you are, the irreducible, non-negotiable, fog-resistant core of who you are, the part that existed before the hemisphere disconnection, the part that will exist after the restoration, the part that cannot be diminished by the world and cannot be enhanced by any tool, because it was complete from the beginning. Everything I have shared in this message, every mechanism, every breakthrough, every named concept, every tool, every science, all of it serves one purpose: to clear the path between that love and your ability to receive it. Because the love was never withheld, the love was never conditional, the love was always pouring, and you, with your foggy receiver and your fractured hemispheres and your exhausted nervous system, have been standing in a rainstorm with an umbrella, wondering why you are thirsty. Close the umbrella. Tomorrow, the rain falls without obstruction, and you, for the first time in longer than you can remember, get to be drenched. Go gently into tonight. Go knowing that you are held. Go knowing that the window opens at dawn. Go knowing that everything has been prepared, everything has been sealed, everything has been marked with your name. And when you wake up tomorrow, on June 20th, the first day of the clearing, do not reach for the weight. Reach for the space. And in the space, find God, waiting, smiling, ready, with hands full of everything you have been praying for. This is the moment. These are the days. You are the one. Type "I receive it" all in the comments if your spirit confirms what has been spoken. And gently press the like button so that this message reaches another chosen one who needs to hear it before the window opens. Someone whose 3-day assignment depends on receiving this in time. Your act of sharing is not a favor to me. It is an act of intercession for a stranger whose life is about to change because you cared enough to push a button. And so it is. It is sealed. It is done.